Hello again, friends. And you are my friends, and welcome to another edition of 605, the Superpodcast.
Mothership!
The only podcast on Turner Time, the Mothership!
Oh, good Lord.
The best wrestling podcast on the planet, the only wrestling podcast that matters. Call somebody. I'm your host, the great Brian Last.
It's me!
The hardest working man in wrestling podcasts.
Yeah! Baby.
And welcome to the second anniversary spectacular here at the Super Podcast. And I'm joined by maybe the most popular co-host we've ever had, possibly, potentially.
What?
And
there's some doubt?
There's some doubt.
So there's some inkling of doubt in people's mind and anyone's mind around the country, around the world that listens to this program that I'm the most popular, indeed the most beloved co-host and guest and affiliate.
Well, I wouldn't go crazy
and
with
cohort and co-conspirator.
You're putting yourself, when you add guest in there beyond co-host, you're putting yourself in a very tight competition with Marceline, Brother Midnight. I mean, I don't know if you can really withstand the...
Baby, I'm sorry, but,
Baby.
Brother Midnight, I'm sorry, but, come on, for heaven's sake. Mark Goulin couldn't win a popularity contest against me if the only people who voted were his immediate family.
You cowardly dog.
Yeah, woof. And let me just say this about that. And another thing, no, in all seriousness, I appreciate you putting me in that lofty company, but let's be honest. I am the most beloved figure in podcasting. You said you were the hardest working man in wrestling podcasting. That's somewhat akin to being the nicest guy in prison these days. A bunch of slobs out there. But you and I, we actually, that's why all of our projects that we cohort on, that we co-conspire on, are so entertaining and successful because we do actually work at you more than me. You're a little obsessive. I'll give you that.
I am. You've used cohort multiple times already so far. It's the word of the day.
I was saying that when I'm one of your more successful cohorts, and the reason why is when we cohort together, there was need to say it twice. Now I've said it 3 times explaining the original principle.
Is that for true?
Well, of course it is. Everything I say is true.
Well, everything you say is true, Jim. It's a pleasure to have you here once again.
Even when I lie. Even when I lie, it's the absolute truth.
Well, we'll find out about that as we get going here with this anniversary show of the Super Podcast. Jim.
Wait, I believe you've made it 2 years. 2 years doing this show.
2 years.
You could have had 3 babies in this time. And as a matter of fact, some people have had babies in the time it takes to listen to one of these shows. But nevertheless, I'm amazed that you have not only lasted 2 years with the flagship show, with the mothership, but also that you have branched out. How many podcasts now are under your auspices?
Ooh, that's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Fiancé?
At least 5, and then potentially 2 more because Arcadia Vanguard handles all the production and everything else for those shows. So
and then you're also the co-host of my 2 shows per week.
Yeah. And what fun that is.
Oh, wow, that was a fucking endorsement, you goddamn traitor, you backstabbing. Yeah, what fun that is. Oh, I tell you, I went to the proctologist. What fun that was. When do you sleep? When do you sleep, son? And to keep up the standards you keep up.
I don't know. It is really tough. I don't know how this turned into an interview, but it is hard to.
It's an anniversary show. It's a big deal, as you said. It's your biggest show of the year. People should realize what can, in only 2 short years, a fine, enterprising young man such as yourself, what kind of empire you have built, what kind of reach that you perpetrate on the podcasting industry, not only in wrestling but in life in general. Happy fucking anniversary. Try to talk good about you give me fucking grief about it. Thank you. Fuck you. Bye.
Well, thank you very much. 2 years. I think I'm just about to outlast Jim Herd's tenure in WCW. So that's good. That's an accomplishment I always wanted to outlast Jim Herd.
Did not run Ric Flair and the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette off either.
Right. So that's always a good thing to have going for you. And this is the anniversary show. This is the beginning of year 3 of the Super Podcast, the closing of the book of year 2. It's very much the Yom Kippur of the Super Podcast here this week, Jim, and it's great to have you. I did want to ask you about something that came up last week. Howard Baum was on the show, and of course, Howard Baum was a photographer for many years in Florida, a little bit after your time. I don't know if you would have traded photos or...
Well, I may have at some point, but I obviously recognize his name from the magazines in the 80s. He was all over the place. And did he work for London Publishing, or was it George Napolitano's fine branch of publications? But I saw his name a bunch.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where it was, but we were talking last week because I found a letter from 1982, from September 7th, 1982, from this guy, James Bross Jr. Do you know this name? Was this someone who ever purchased photos from you?
No, I actually never really sold to the public individually, just because I just didn't have the time and setup to do so.
Huh, so like all the photographers you would see who had want lists and had lists of things for sale, you never did that. You just focused on the arenas. No,
well, and here's the thing. When I first started taking pictures, and Christine Jarrett encouraged me to send them into the Wrestling News, Norm Keitzer and Jim Melby's publication, they sold those in the arenas and obviously got them wholesale, sold them retail. But they wanted pictures of their guys, so they'd sell more magazines. So I started sending the pictures in, and originally what they had told me was, well, we'll give you, we don't normally pay our photographers. We'll give you an ad, a classified ad where you could sell your pictures. Okay. So, but quickly, it would have turned into chaos for me at 15 years old, trying to manage, even if it was 20 or 30 letters a week for individual pictures, while I'm selling pictures in bulk and covering the matches. Plus, when I told Miss Christine about that, Teeny said, wait a minute, we don't want you selling the pictures individually anyway. We want to be able to sell them, blah, blah, blah. So she kind of strong-armed Norm Keitzer into paying me like $25 an issue or whatever. And then by the time it was about, 3 years later, I was doing my entire own magazine that he was printing for me that I was selling to her, and they were outselling his 10-1.
Well, there you go.
So there you have it. Another case of there you are.
So what kind of relationships did you have with other photographers who shot for the magazines or did sell pictures to the public?
Well, it depends, because really the only time that I would ever meet any of those guys in person, I mean, we might talk on the phone or exchange letters and programs, because a lot of them were fans also, so we would correspond. But the only time I'd ever see them in person was either if they went to the WFIA convention. Because think about this, I got started as a photographer in '76 when I was just before I turned 15. So I was 14. And I was in the business right before I was going to turn 21. So, and I only worked the Memphis territory except for the conventions. So I'd met Dave McClain and Scott Romer when I was a kid, and used to go to Indianapolis every once in a while as a fan, and had bought some stuff from them. And obviously I knew Mike Shields, who worked more for Nick than for Jarrett after the split in Tennessee, and he took some great stuff of the territory. But I didn't get a chance to, meet a lot of them because they didn't come here, because after a while, After didn't need to send anybody here because he could either get something from me at this end or Eddie Gilbert at the other end. And we didn't really travel. I didn't travel to other territories to work as a photographer, because it wasn't going to be a regular. I had all I could say grace over, as they say over here. So there was I had no direct competition here except for Eddie Gilbert, before he got started wrestling, and Mike Shields, who ended up going with Nick in the split in Nashville. So.
Well, this letter we read on the air last week, Jim, was from the aforementioned James Bross Jr. It was to the photo dealers he's had problems with. He wanted them all to sign a petition about a code of conduct for photographers. And he lists all of his various grievances in this letter.
Okay, so wait a minute. This guy is just a regular fan who's been buying pictures from these people, and because he doesn't like the interactions they've had, he wants them to sign a letter that he has drawn up indicating how they should conduct themselves.
Absolutely. Correct.
Okay,
100% correct.
Very good.
Well, the only person who I guess he wants to sign a petition but he has nothing bad to say about is Gene Gordon, a somewhat legendary photographer.
Well, yeah, you couldn't say anything bad about Gene Gordon. And he was always nice to people. Yeah. As a matter of fact, wait a minute, I'm starting to read this letter. I may be getting ahead of you. I saw his name there.
Well, he didn't have a problem with Gene Gordon, but he sure didn't like Mike O'Hara. because that's the first of the people he just goes off about. And what seems to be a pattern
Okay,
here.
well, let me then say what he said about Gene Gordon. Even though you didn't sign my petition, the letter you sent was very heartwarming. Gene would write these multi-page letters a drop of a hat in his scrawling handwriting. I've got a bunch of them still. But the guy says, I'll apologize publicly here. You are surly, a man of integrity. America needs more people like us. That's what the guy says to Gene Gordon. Okay, go ahead.
That's a central theme in this letter, is the idea that he's really fighting on behalf of America against these corrupt wrestling photographers. Mike O'Hara, he's not happy with because he waited 2 months for a good photo of the mummy. One of the complaints he raises here is that O'Hara did not put "photos do not bend" on the envelope. As a photographer, is this something that would drive you crazy?
Well, I actually would always put "photos do not bend" on the envelope. However, the guy writes, after waiting 2 months for a good photo of the mummy, I received it today. I was pleased with the photo because many came back with bends. Here's the thing. That's actually what you used to do when you were a fan and photo buyer and trader and etc. You would search for good pictures of whoever you were looking for. But I don't know that anybody's ever waited 2 months for a great picture of probably, if it was Mike O'Hara, maybe Benji Ramirez or whatever. But regardless, he seems a bit obsessive already.
Yeah, and obviously this whole letter is in caps. And this is the first time
I noticed that. Yeah, it's typed on an actual desktop typewriter because it's 1982, and everything is in capitals.
He talks about all the various names that O'Hara wrote back to him, that he called him in this letter that he returned back to him. The next person, listen, do you know this person, Terrence Machalik?
Yeah. He worked out of Canada. It wasn't Toronto? Was it Winnipeg, perhaps? But wait, here is a wild one. Sends the petition back torn up in a fit of rage. Typical irrational sort of act. Doesn't bother me, though. I have a nice little surprise for old cranky TM. He won't measure up to Gene Gordon. Oh, my God. Yeah. Oh, what about poor Howard Baum?
Well, Howard Baum, which was the reason we found this. Jim, since you've done so good reading these so far, read what he said about Howard.
This dealer sends me a shot of Brian St. John and Stanley Lane when I ordered the Bounty Hunters, a.k.a. the Novaks. I say no ropes, I get ropes. That used to be a big thing. They wanted pictures with no ropes in the way. I also get a sheep herder photo that is terrible. He says the negative of Buzz Sawyer is destroyed, yet it is on his list. That's wild, Howard, isn't it? Then he calls me insane, ridiculous, believes I have a complex because I think someone has been laying a bum rap on me. Yet I send 2 photos back and he rips me off for $1.50. Who's giving me a bum rap, Howard? You grovel over that a little.
$1.50. He's getting so upset about. There are a few other people here. Laura Zofka, John Lawson.
I remember Laura Zofka. Yes. She was a lovely, a woman, but certainly not a lady.
Well,
wait a minute. She tries to compare me to Iranians. If I did buy my own camera, I certainly would not charge $1.25 for less than high-quality photos. She wants me to accept her human faults. Laura, I accept your human fault of greed. So does the economy. Everybody yells about the state of the economy. Whose fault is the economy? Not mine.
You know what's funny? You can also read this in Bill Watts' voice.
Yeah.
It sounds like one of those running commentaries he would do in the middle of a match about the Iranians and the Russians and everything else. He's got a problem with
John Lawson. I knew John. He was in Terre Haute, I believe, wasn't he?
So that's WWA.
Yes, he did a WWA newsletter, Indiana Wrestling Review or something such as that for years, and I've got a bunch of his pictures, sent him a bunch of mine. Yes. He wants his name removed, and well, I can't read the next word. You all sound like I'm punishing you or something. Well, the photos I received are beat or something. The stud photo was bent. I certainly can't figure out how all of the photos are bent. Maybe we should send a petition to the post office. And Dominic Marcello, I remember Dom Marcello. Yes, Bruce Viner. Yeah, he was in Illinois.
Well, read this last one, if I may ask, Jim. Finally, Mr. Cunliffe.
Mr. Cunliffe. I don't recognize the name. Is this a guy? I thought it was Cuntlip the way I was looking at it there. But Mr. Defamation, as you said, there's no time limit yet. Mr. Viner gets his photos here in 2 weeks or less. Why can't you or O'Hara? I've certainly been courteous, waiting for 50 days for 2 photos and a want list. Yeah, I may be thoughtless, pompous, asinine, offensive, insane, ridiculous, have a persecution complex, and as you say, Joe, discourteous, fanatical, callous, arrogant, rude. However, Joe, I've never been a crock or a criminal. I think that should have been crook.
Yeah, I think so.
A crock or crook or criminal. Boy, when you add up all those words, that 12 defamations of character to your 1. I'd really like to know who should be suing, you or me. If you intend not to apologize to me, please don't expect me to fly to Pennsylvania on a welfare check. I don't even have a job, so he's bypassing pictures. And to think you all expect me to help you survive on a welfare check. In my years on this planet, I've never been so insulted and humiliated in my life. All my life, I've caught hell from Americans. He said earlier he's from America. I've struggled and have met with hardships in every walk, but I never thought I would lose respect for other Americans. All my life, I've caught hell from Americans, but I never thought I'd lose respect for Americans. You all sign contracts in every business venture you undertake. It is both necessary and expedient. If we're going to have a better America, then we must start with ourselves. Lashing out at me is not going to solve anything, and tearing up my petition is kind of childish. Oh, good Lord. And he goes on and on about it. I really collecting photos for a while. I've been very patient. I've welcomed letters and opinions, but it's turned into a disaster. How long do you keep getting slapped in the face until the pain was too much to bear? How many customers are feeling that, what, are we not men or women enough to take a stand? Yes. I'll welcome any comments. You know, Gene, it says in the Bible, pride goeth before the fall. I guess I've heard a few prides, haven't I, sir? Oh, my, the wisdom of the Bible. I knew that was going to come in someplace. When my own survival is now my only concern, the time is just too short to worry about photos. I suppose there will be no more letters or money coming your way unless you sign a contract. None. Regards, James Brose Jr.
No job, welfare, yet he's buying pictures from multiple dealers around the country.
But the thing is, do they expect him to keep them supported and taken care of on a welfare check? Why would somebody else support you and take care of you?
Can you imagine you sold someone $1.50 worth of photos, and then you get this letter in the mail, and you're like, what the hell is this? It's 2 pages, typewritten, all in caps, point-by-point takedowns of all the photographers who won't sign his petition. So, I guess you're lucky you didn't sell to the public, Jim.
Who was it? Terrence, I think it was Terry Machalek. I believe, I'm sorry, I'm terrible on pronunciations. But yes, he tore it up in a fit of rage. Good for Terry.
Well, Jim, before we get going, we're about to get going with the top 10, but I did have one other thing I sent you there, and it's something I found so interesting because rarely do you hear a promoter take shots at someone. But this is from a Cowboy Luttrell column in the Tampa program. He had a regular column there, and he was the promoter. Him and Eddie Graham were partners, and he was there before Eddie. And I found this so interesting. I saw this in Barry Rose's Championship Wrestling from Florida Facebook group, and I thought you'd get a kick out of it.
Well, yes, and I remember I've got some of the old programs with the Cowboys Corner. And what year did you say this was?
I believe it would be 67 based on the main event that's listed there as Gene Kiniski as the NWA champion.
Yeah.
And seeing Buddy Fuller's crew, it looks like Buddy and Sputnik are there. I think it's 67.
Yeah, and Eddie Graham is obviously figured in at the time in the office, but Cowboy Luttrell, especially at that, and actually may still have been technically on paper the owner, but Cowboy Luttrell had been the promoter down in Florida for years and years, and everybody knew he was the boss of wrestling at that point in time, right? So that's for our younger viewers. Would you like me to read the Cowboys Corner for this particular occasion?
Yeah, and I want you to tell me after you read it if it's something that stands out to you.
Well, Cowboy Luttrell says the December issue of Wrestling Confidential magazine carried a story by one of professional wrestling's least distinguished has-beens, Joe Savoldi. In the article, Savoldi made some rather caustic criticisms of today's wrestlers. Now, I'll allow any man the right to criticize, but I expect him to back his words up with facts. Instead of doing this, Joe Savoldi used himself as a model of the superiority he claimed for yesterday's wrestlers. Many of today's wrestling fans don't remember Joe Savoldi, but I do. I remember a man who found pro football too rough to suit him. He then turned to wrestling only to find the mat game even more rugged than the gridiron. There was no turning back, though, so Mr. Savoldi had to stick it out in wrestling. I wish pro football had taken him back, but I don't blame them for not doing so.
Wow.
At some point, if this was Cowboy Luttrell who actually wrote that, or somebody in the Florida office was not a fan of Joe Savoldi, let's put it that way. Now, I think we should probably, is 67-ish, 8-ish, maybe we should ask Scott Teal, who, if Cowboy Luttrell even read any of these columns that he wrote for the program at that point in time, or who would have written such a thing. That may have been right before Scott got involved, but he may have some insight on that.
Right, because that's the question. Did the cowboy sit down with pen and paper and cowboy hat and write this? Or did he just talk out loud while some assistant in the office, you put that Joe Savoldi is a has-been?
Or conversely, did Cowboy Luttrell at that point give a fuck what was printed in his program? And was it Eddie Graham or was it Buddy Fuller or whoever was booking? Or was it anybody in the office that just, hey, fuck this fucking guy? They probably read that magazine article. And Wrestling Confidential, I thought that was a Stanley Weston publication, right? And because I've got it's out of reach, but I have a good little run of them in the early 60s, mid 60s. But he got in trouble a number of times for printing. He would make up the stories. He was the pioneer of doing that. And then Bill Apter went to work for Stanley's line of magazines.
And started making up stories.
And started, so he got in trouble for that a couple times with the offices or with the talent for, saying something or going too far. It was in Bill Apter's book that Stanley Weston. So maybe that was the subject of that or whatever. Somebody in Florida was fucking pissed at Joe Savoldi.
Well, we'll see what we can find out in the weeks ahead here on the Super Podcast. But Jim,
weeks and months to come, we'll get more clarification on this business.
We will attempt to, no guarantees, but it is now time for the top 10. And of course, Jim, that means we have to tell you a little bit about our friends, the wrestling fans over at Ramsor Records. And of course, you can visit their online store, ramsorrecords.kungfustore.com, RAMSEUR, ramsorrecords.kungfustore.com. Use the promo code 605 at checkout and save 20% on your order. I want to remind the listeners once again, the Steep Canyon Rangers' new album comes out Friday, January 25th. You can preview a song right now at rollingstone.com/country and check it out. It was recorded in Kernersville, North Carolina at Mitch Easter's Fidelatorium. Mitch, of course, produced the early REM records. Now, that album comes out January 25th. You can pre-order it now. And 2 days later, January 27th, is the record release party at ExploreAsheville.com Arena. Now, that's not what it was called back in the days when you worked in that arena, Jim.
Oh, good Lord. Where is that now?
Asheville, North Carolina.
Is that the Asheville Civic Center now?
It is now the ExploreAsheville.com Arena.
Well, wouldn't you know who won the pony? And what was the name of that? What was the name of that band that is so highly sought after, going up the charts with a bullet that you just plugged?
The Steep Canyon Rangers.
The Steep Canyon Rangers. See, a lot of people don't know this, but before Dolph Ramser got a hold of them, they were always talented musicians, but Dolph is a marketing genius. You know this to be true. Everything he touches turns to gold if it's not platinum. And he switched them around. He changed their original name. A lot of people don't remember this, was Ramblers Road Apples. And see, it's all in how you're presented. See, so they've done a great job now. They're the hottest thing in music.
And then they went with Dolph Ramser. They became.
Do they have road apples in New Jersey? Do they have road apples in New Jersey?
You just mean an apple you buy on the side of the road?
No, you don't know what a road apple is. You Northern Yankee fuck.
What's a road apple?
A road apple is when you're going down the road and there's a big pile of horse shit. A road apple. When the horses would go down the road, they will shit when they're walking. They just shit wherever they are. And in the old days, especially in the country, when you had more horses than you did cars, you would come up upon a road apple right often, and you needed to avoid those at all costs, or else because it takes forever to get that fucking stink off of you. Just like being on this show.
Yeah, we don't have those in the North, if that was to answer your question. But let's move away from...
My line would have been even funnier.
Well,
if you'd have known what a road apple was.
Well, what was your line?
Ramblers Road Apples.
Well, okay, let's move away from manure to get back to telling you the Steep Canyon Rangers' new album Friday, January 25th. And of course, ExploreAsheville.com Arena, January 27th, 8 p.m., the big album release show. You can get more information about that by going through the U.S. Cellular Center box office, online at Ticketmaster.com, or by phone at 1-800-745-3000. And once again, don't forget the big link, RamSoreRecords.KungFuStore.com. Ramsor Records, the Mid-Atlantic wrestling of the music industry. Well, Jim, with that,
and Ramblers Road Apples. Get them. They're good.
No, don't get them. But with that, let's get going with the top 10. This week,
yes, sir.
At number 10, Jim, and this man's going to be upset about this because he slid way down this week, is the handsome boogeyman, not Jimmy Valiant. And as we heard last time on the show, he will not be making any further appearances until he's number 1. So I believe I can now say, let's go to this recording with my conversation with Not Charlie Brown from Not Out of Town. Here at number 10 this week in the top 10, kicking off the top 10 here on the Anniversary Spectacular, is the handsome boogeyman, not Jimmy Valiant. Although I guess after last week's show, we're supposed to call you Not Charlie Brown from Not Out of Town. Is that correct?
No, this is handsome Jimbo, not from Memphis. In reference to Charlie Brown, my blood brother from out of town. He's out of town. He had to leave abruptly when he heard about my piss poor standing in the top 10. I couldn't even look the brother in the eye. So I'm going to take it from here. I got a lot of things to get off my mind on this most auspicious anniversary program. Oh, when I get to the bottom of the 605 top 10, now Boogie's Army turned their back on me again, and Charlie Brown and Big Mama are my only friends. Oh, mercy.
Well, handsome, that was a hell of a song. What do you have to say this week here at number 10 in the top 10?
Well, there were false reports of Not Handsome Boogie's death that surfaced over the past 2 weeks without the top 10 in place. And I'm just here to debunk those rumors. It was a mere death hoax, an internet death hoax. No truth at all to those scurrilous rumors. There was confusion in the marketplace last though. What had happened was I had announced that I was contemplating quitting the show in protest of my sorry-ass ranking insofar as the top 10 goes. And that was misinterpreted and discombobulated by certain yellow journalists on Twitter, MySpace, and Tout. And various sundry... Tout, that's right, Tout and Vine. Various sundry so-called social media platforms. And in fact, I had quit the show and had been killed off. But I'm here to debunk those rumors. I'm still alive and well, you Miyazoks.
Okay, well, we're happy to have you here. I hadn't heard those rumors myself, but handsome, I'm glad that you can clarify for everyone that you're here and you're here to stay.
Well, Brother Lasto, you can readily see how a rumor like that can spread and take off quickly I was going to say wildfire, but that's a piss-poor choice of words. Hey, is Stuttering Tommy Rich dead yet? Has he been killed off? Has he been killed off?
He is dead, yes, he is dead.
He is dead. Yeah. That motherfucker hung on longer than David Cassidy.
Oh, Jesus. Come on, Boogeyman. That's too soon, I think, for that kind of comment.
Perhaps so. But as you celebrate 2 years at a super podcast with a future that looks bright ahead, I've had time to reflect on my own lengthy Hall of Fame career. And I'm here to make a huge announcement that after some 7 or 8 decades in what I call the king of sports, I'm finally going to wind down my in-ring career and possibly retire from active wrestling at the end of 2018. Boogie Super Jam 18 coming your way in the new year, taking on all comers as I make one last worldwide, nationwide tour. This could be your last chance to see handsome Boogie, not Jimmy, in your town or local gym or hotel ballroom.
Ballrooms?
Yes, wherever they can construct a lopsided ring. ballroom, Legion Post, or what have you. Now, speaking of ballrooms, that's what I told my seamstress I wanted when she sewed my new title. Extra ballroom. Extra ballroom.
Okay, all right, Boogeyman. Well, you're taking this right into the bottom of the toilet this week, but any closing words, any last messages you have for the 605ers?
Well, to sum up, Brother Lasto, the future looks bright ahead for Not Handsome, Not Jimmy. I got a long way to go and a short time to get there, and I know I can do it with the help of Not Jimbo's army and the loyal 605 mothershippers. But I can't do it at number fucking 10, capiche?
Okay, all right.
It's almost Black Friday. Never too early to give Boogie Woogie from Mempho what he wants for Xmas. The 605 title back under his tree. Ho, ho, ho. Oh, now if the ring crew don't mind, and the Rios don't mind, well, you can take a little time and vote for Handsome Jimbo. One more time. Whoa. Mercy, Santa.
There he is at number 10, the handsome boogeyman, or perhaps I should say not Charlie Brown from Not Out of Town. Jim, what did you think of what he had to say?
I don't think he is who you think he's not.
Who do you think he's not?
That's what I think. Well, I don't know.
I saw him driving a station wagon. It must be him. There were flames on the side of it.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. If there's no boogeyman has ever been behind the driver's wheel in a car, so he is definitely not the boogeyman.
Scott Cordes told a story on the show. You know, Scott, like me, and probably you, I would assume, loves having wrestling records. When you can get like something on vinyl that was released years ago, it's so cool. And Scott was trying to get a hold of one of Jimmy Valiant's records, and I guess Big Mama was on eBay selling them. So Scott got in touch with her and he said, hey, you know, if you are still selling these, I'd be interested. And she said something along the lines of, that'd be great. Give me a few days. I have to go to Jimmy's garage and get them and then check back in with me. And like a few days later, Scott checks back in and, you know, Scott's a very nice guy. And he's like, You know, excuse me, Big Mama, I just was checking in. Is there any update? You know, I can't wait to own this. And her response was something along the lines of, I don't think you deserve to have one of these records. He never got the record. So.
Well, I wish I'd have known it. I had a few at one time, a few extras. I've sold those, unfortunately. I now have my collection, though.
Do you have a wrestling vinyl collection?
Oh my God, yes.
What do you have?
I've got all the Memphis stuff, really. Most everything Lawler did from, you know, Bad News up through like the early 80s when I left the territory. I may not have some of his late 80s releases, but also I've got the Jesse Ventura picture disc. Him in the camo, and then the other side, him in the boa. I've got, you know, Pencil Neck Geek, Freddie Blassie, Adrian Street's records, several of those. I'm just trying to do this off the top of my head. Jimmy Hart, some stuff, including not only his wrestling records, but also some of his albums with the Gentrys.
Do you have the Rocca record?
I do not.
I recently got it on eBay for just a few bucks. I was like, what the hell is this? It was like the music of Antonino Rocca. And of course, you know, he's not singing or conducting, obviously, but they have pictures on the sleeve on the back of him like in the studio conducting and hanging out with the orchestra. It's just music.
Now, see, I can't believe you got that for a cup. If somebody said, I'll give it to you $20, I would have done that just for the fucking novelty of it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I
give you $20 for it.
No, thank you. No, thank you. Well, you know what? I don't know. I could probably get it for a couple bucks on eBay and make a healthy profit.
There you go. Be my fucking middleman here. You're working for a Persian diplomat buying these things. I've
got Rocca on vinyl. I've got Rocca in comic book form. I have Antonino Rocca across multiple platforms of entertainment.
Oh, the Superman that he was on the cover of?
Yeah, Superman versus Rocca.
Yes, because I mentioned that, and I got 3 of them in the mail from Cult of Cornette members. It was and I appreciate every single one of them, but especially the one that was in really nice shape. But it was amazing that because I mentioned I'd never seen it. I'd heard about it but never seen it, and all the time I'd collected comics and then boom, and there it was. So you never know.
You know what I have on vinyl that I think you probably don't have? This.
Going to wrestling.
I'm pretty sure you don't have that. Glenn Goza?
My boss called me and said, friend, it could be modeled for Fredericks of Hollywood, but it's kind of nasty. We were wrestling.
I do not have that. No, I don't. They were wonderfully musical. Dad, I came from the Memphis territory, where Memphis. The fucking bum on the street is an accomplished musician in Memphis, and the guys doing records there, and Jimmy having been actually in the music business and etc. They would go to Dallas and they're trying to compose their own shit. And Dallas is not center of the music business.
And it certainly wasn't at this time, because there was Glenn Goza's Wrestling. It was also Heaven Needed a Champion. And then there was the Chris Von Erich classic, My Dad Can Whip Your Dad.
Yeah,
So,
the Heaven Needed a Champion was the era at that point that we was just like, oh God. Anyway, nevertheless, moving on
from putting down tributes to past wrestlers to number 9 in the top 10. This is a debut, and we haven't recorded it yet, so I don't know how it's going to go. But a few weeks back, Howard Baum did a Don Morocco impression, and it got a big reaction. So we're now going to visit this character, whoever he may be, and whatever he's going to say, I don't know. We're just going to call him the Magnificent One for now. Let's see how this works out. At number 9 in the top 10, the Magnificent One. Making his debut in this week's top 10 at number 9 is a man we only know as the Magnificent One. We received a letter from Sunset Beach, Hawaii. This man asked for a chance to speak here at the top 10, and I believe he should be on the line right now. Magnificent One, are you there?
Oh, look who it is. The great Brian Last. 605, the biggest podcast in the universe, has deemed worthy to call upon the Prince of Darkness himself, the Magnificent One.
All right. Well,
what can I do for you today?
Well, first of all, I didn't contact you. Let's get that straight, Magnificent One. But it is great to have you here. I know a lot of listeners are probably saying, wait, he was the Prince of Darkness. But yes, that was indeed a nickname you used for yourself at one time or another. What are you doing here? Why are you now here in the top 10?
I was the first man to do so many things. I'm here for the competition. I heard this is the place to be. The most out there, the most place to be, top 10 in the entire wrestling industry. Sue the Shooter. Hot Dog. Hot Dog.
Hot Dog, yes.
Come on.
Yes.
Even though I'm a big fan, I'm coming for you.
Okay.
I think the Hot Dog is extremely witty, for the record. But I am going to be at the top of the heap when the top 10 rankings come out. By Thanksgiving. And by the way, thank you for waiting 2 years into your run to contact the most all-around first man to eat a salami sandwich while running a triathlon. First man to eat chicken tetrazzini while scaling Mount Kilimanjaro.
Okay, wait, hold on, Magnificent One.
Let's get it straight.
What did you say? You were the first man to eat a what?
You know damn well what I did. I was the first man to eat a BLT while impregnating Anne Margaret.
What?
Look it up, 1974.
All right, hold on.
I once ate a tray of lasagna while riding the biggest wave on the North Shore.
Well, look.
Check it out.
Look, I know that you had a match where you ate a meatball hero, and you, of course, had an interview where you ate donuts, but I had no idea that there were so many things that you did while eating food. I'm
the innovator. I have done so many food and strenuous activity combinations, it would make your head. I have eaten caviar while detailing my car.
Okay, all right.
I am the first man to eat a banana split while performing the world's first Siamese twin separation.
All right. Listen, Magnificent One, before I'm sure there's a whole list that we can go through here of things that you've done while eating food, but we want to move beyond that. There has to be a purpose. You said the competition, but is there any other real reason why you're here this week on the show?
To be perfectly honest with you, I would not take my toes out from dipping them in the warm waters of Sunset Beach, which is a real place, by the way. And I would not take myself away from the slim and slender fingertips of all the ladies who like to oil up my big coconut-sized shoulders. But I come to you with a very important announcement today.
Coconut-sized?
And this might be a little bit out of character, so listen up if you will.
All right.
I am here to talk about something very near and dear to my heart today. And it's a little bit out of character, but I think it's important. I have been appointed the head of the Ernie Roth Memorial Clinic for Oral Hygiene for the Indigent.
What the Ernie Roth, the Grand Wizard Clinic for Oral Hygiene for the Indigent?
For the indigent.
What?
Give it back to the community. Give it back to the community. And you can check it out. It's a real clinic. You can look it up. And I would be remiss if I didn't give you guys the contact information where you could donate. We are currently accepting old bridge work, gold teeth, bronze teeth, partials,
All right.
bridges, old dentures.
It sounds like you accept everything, but how can the listeners get in touch with this charity that you're claiming that you're now the PR person for?
It's very simple. 22 Acapulco Lane. Maybe I should spell that out for you people on the mainland.
What was it? Acapulco?
22 Acapulco Lane.
Okay, how do you spell that?
Okay, you got your pens and pencils? Get ready. 22 Acapulco Lane. K-E-I-H-A-M-I-A-K-U-K.
It sounds like you're going through the entire Hawaiian alphabet here today. Magnificent One.
Apostrophe.
Okay.
A-U-A-K-H-I-H-U.
Okay, all right. Maybe there's a link they can click or something instead.
I'm going to put it up there on the cyberspace anyway. You people don't have to worry about that.
All right.
What else can the Magnificent One do for you today?
I think that's it today. Any final words for the listeners of the Super Podcast, Magnificent One?
I just want to say thank you for all the cards and letters and the accolades and the hot dog and Sue the Shooter and all the rest of you. I'm coming for you because it's all coming down. And by down, I mean my phone, you stupid Howie.
There he is, number 9 in the top 10, the debut of the Magnificent One, or whatever we decide to finally call him at the end of the day. Any thoughts on that, Jim?
How the fuck am I supposed to have any thoughts on it when you've just said you didn't know what the fuck it was going to be because you hadn't recorded it yet?
That's a good analysis. I think most of us would agree with you on that. At number 9, the Magnificent One. At number 8, an old friend of yours. It wouldn't be the anniversary show without Mrs. Spencer, the old lady.
Hey, stupid. Homosexual Jim.
Mrs. Spencer, please die in the next 30 seconds.
Who are you and what do you want? You motherfucker.
This is the one everyone loves. Goodbye, fuckhead.
Go to hell, you motherfucking son of a bitch.
I disagree. Goodbye, fuckhead is not, or it's got to be a tie between I wish you'd die in the next 30 seconds and when she starts speaking in tongues, as then you expect the fucking alien being to pop out of her throat.
You motherfucker.
She sounds like Chief J Strongbow.
Chief J Strongbow on a 78 on a fucking 33 fucking turntable. All right. Yeah.
Son of a bitch, you. I hope you die in the next 30 minutes, you motherfucking bastard, you.
Yeah, that may be it. But the speaking in tongues, it never gets old.
Well, that's number 8 in the top 10, Mrs. Spencer, the old lady. At number 7 this week in the top 10, Jim, is Jim Cornette's answering machine. What happens is...
Wait a minute. Are you going to call my answering machine while we're talking now?
Well, that is how it works. We call the answering...
Won't one of us burst into flames if something like that happens? Or there's some kind of matter-antimatter reversal? Let me tell you a story. Can I tell you a story? I'm going to tell you...
Yes.
So I'm in Orlando at the Doubletree Hotel at a TNA taping in like 2008. And every morning, Dutch Mantel stayed at the same hotel, and he would ride over, because I had a vehicle, he would ride over with me to the studios for the taping. And I'm in my hotel room, and I'm in the bathroom because Stacy's with me, and she's still asleep because it's early in the morning. So I'm in the bathroom with the door closed, trying to get ready without waking her up, and the fucking lights are off out there and everything. And I figure I'm going to call Dutch on my cell phone here, right, that I've got in my hand in the bathroom. And I'm going to ask him if he's all set to go in 10 minutes. I'll meet him in the lobby. So as I dial Dutch Mantell's number on my cell phone and I hit call or enter or whatever the fuck, the hotel room phone rings outside, and I hear it, and it wakes Stacy up because she's right next to it in the bed. And I open the bathroom door, and she says, hold on. And I said, who is it? And she said, it's Dutch. So for a split second, I somehow couldn't process the fact that while I had called Dutch on my cell phone, the room phone had rang, and it was Dutch on the other end of it. And it just threw me off for the rest of the fucking day.
And there it is, the worst story Jim Cornette's ever told in a public forum. Will always go down in history on the anniversary show for the Super Podcast. But Jim, we have to call number 7 in the top 10, Jim Cornette's answering machine. Let's call him right now.
Oh, for God's sake.
I'm adding people. Add Jim Cornette's answering machine. This will be a good experience for you. You'll get to see how difficult it is to leave you a message. And it appears we are dialing Jim Cornette's answering machine right now.
Yeah, you may be able to faintly hear it because I put the phone across the room so we would not be disturbed.
How many rings does it take to get to the center of Jim Cornette's answering machine?
I'm going to say 4. Because actually, the phone...
Hi, thanks for calling Jim Cornette. I'm currently hiding from the outside world, but if you leave a message and I either really like you or you're offering me a lot of money, I'll call you back. Leave your message that fits either category at the beep.
Homosexual Jim.
At number 7 this week in the top 10, Jim Cornette's answering machine. Our guest this week on the show is Jim Cornette. Anything you'd like to say to Jim Cornette's answering machine?
Well, I like when I play this back, you see the reason why that, and we're going to run it down to the nub, I'm sure, but the reason why that there's not a lot of space is because I do have messages over a period of time from people that I like, or, you know, I have some Lance Russell messages I've saved, or just somebody said something nice or whatever, sentimental old me, right? So I save them on there. And now I've only got like a minute and a half of space on the machine because I've saved all these sentimental messages, and now I don't know what to do with them.
Let's spend
I
the
used
night
to
together.
Sounds like Kevin Sullivan knows what to do.
Let's spend the night together.
I probably will end up recording them somehow on video or whatever, and then saving the videotape and the whole thing and doing that. But right now but I don't really solicit a lot of people to call me on the phone.
You know, I find your answering machine quite boring today, so I'm going to hang up on it before it gets to the end. Boom. Oh.
I can't believe it wasn't at the end already because I don't have that much room.
Jim Cornette's answering machine has left the line, and that's number 7 in the top 10. Jim Cornette's answering machine. Number 6 in the top 10, one of the...
So you're the one that's always running down my goddamn answering machine where people, if somebody called with an important medical emergency...
Does that happen?
I wouldn't be able to get the message. Well, it could happen.
It could.
I wouldn't be able to get the message of the important medical emergency because of your tomfoolery here and shenanigans.
If I could go back in time and take back that message, I would. But I can't.
If I could turn back time, if I could find a way.
Yes.
I'd go back and, all right.
All right, well, number 6 in the top 10, one of the most popular characters in show history, Yo Mamba, the Jungle Savage.
Yo Mamba, the Jungle Savage.
And there you hear the voice of the maligned Marcolene, who Jim Cornette slandered earlier in the show, but a very popular figure on the show as well.
I have a surprise coming for you.
It's not slander when it's true.
Well, that remains to be decided firmly.
That remains to be Gouline.
Remains to be Gouline. I have been working on finally uncovering the man behind Yo Mamba, and I could say that I'm hopeful that hopefully there's lots of hope that we will have some answers soon in the search for the identity of the Jungle Savage, Yo Mamba.
I will tell you more about him later.
That's number 6 in the top 10. Yo Mamba, the Jungle Savage.
Your Mamba, the Jungle Savage.
At number 5 in the top 10, Jim. Answer me.
Scorpion, is it you? I just love the music.
Do you remember last year on the anniversary show, you read a column called Confessions of a Ring Rat?
Sue the Shooter.
I'm going to stop because this is going nowhere. But it's the Black Scorpion at number 5. You've been talking a lot with him on your shows lately. At the end of the drive-thru, I've noticed the Black Scorpion has shown up a few times and called you out for that 89 booking committee not doing as good of work as the 1990 booking team of Ole Anderson and Ole Anderson. But we brought up Sue the Shooter. Last year, you read the famous column, Confessions of a Ring Rat, became a very popular segment on the show. You reading the story of Sue the Shooter. Last week, with Howard Baum in the co-host chair, we discovered an old letter sent to the photographer Brian Berkowitz in Florida. And Pete Letterberg had saved this. I got this from him about 20 years ago. And I sent this to you. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And
Brian Berkowitz was a ringside photographer that covered the Florida area, and his pictures were seen in the magazines and et cetera, back in the old days when that was a thing. But apparently Pete Lederberg, who has ended up with a collection of thousands and tens of thousands of pictures, is an old friend of mine from the WFIA days and et cetera, had a copy of this because apparently it made quite the impression. And the guy that wrote this, who is writing this letter now?
Well, his name, as revealed at the end of this, is Pernell W. Beauchamp.
I think it's probably Beecham. It's probably a southern way to say that. But this letter, would you like me to? I think we should team up on this. I think we should alternate paragraphs because this is clearly. It's obviously, first of all, written on either parchment or butcher paper. Possibly, was there a human organ that this was wrapped in this letter, or it looks like somebody's just really he's crooked. The letters are leaning backwards. That's a sign of mental instability, right?
Potentially, I guess.
Let me read the first. Attention, Brian Berkowitz. You and Steve Kern are to lay off my girl, Malka Rabinowitz, now. Malka depends on me for her living expenses. The lousy airline job doesn't pay her enough to buy a decent coat. Oh, fuck it. I found your names in her address book. I have persuaded her to confess. Persuaded in parenthesis, quotes, quotation marks, what I was searching for. She told me how you're helping her to get a meeting with that no-good peroxide blonde fairy Steve Kern. If he pays her rent, he can meet her anytime. But since I have a lease on her favors, he either buys himself someone or go molest a blind kid, which is what he probably does. Malka is only looking for a cheap thrill. She don't care about either of you homos. Oh my God! So this guy's already admitted that he's paying this girl's expenses in to trade for pussy, apparently. But he's mad that she's wanting to fuck Steve Kern, and for free, even is what I'm gathering from this so far. Would you concur?
Yeah.
Pick it up there, Brian. You read a couple.
Let's face it. Nobody really cares about wrestlers. Hell, they're cheap thrills. A $3 ticket could get any drunk or hooker in to see them strut half naked. Even the blood is fake to scare old ladies and dumb kids. Wrestlers think they're so super. Well, they're not. They're just a bunch of chumps who get beaten to entertain lower-class criminals. I tell you, if they had any brains, they wouldn't be in such a stupid profession. Who cares about them? Who cares if they bleed or die?
Wait a minute. The blood was fake in the previous paragraph, and now the injuries are fatal, and he doesn't care. Wait a minute. You ever notice the kind of dirt that go to wrestling? Not one decent person in the entire arena. All you see are ugly, fat, deformed women and unemployed pimps. Half the goons that watch wrestling can't be shown in public. I ain't never seen a girl at wrestling that dressed decent.
If you, and especially that ape, Steve Kern, don't leave my Malka alone, I'm gonna punch both of you from here to eternity. I know who you are, Brian. You're the kid with the big nose that blocks everyone's way with your camera. I've done my own investigating when it comes to you. I'm not a person with no connections.
So basically he goes to the wrestling matches because that way he knows what kind of crowd is there. And he also knows that Brian is the guy that blocks his way with the camera. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. As for Steve Kern, I challenge that evil punk to a tape fist match. I guarantee you this motherfucker, just sight unseen, this motherfucker did not want to be in a tape fist match with Steve fucking Kern. I'll even pay the chumpy chicken to face me. He may be great in fixed matches, but let the real man, me, emerge in a real match. He's going to emerge, bro. You two better not think these are idle threats from a stupid fan, because I'm not a fan of wrestling. I'm a guy who's going to keep his girl no matter what.
I doubt Malka can even write you again. If she does, you are to tear up her letters. If she approaches you, slap her. I think Malka will have the good sense to know a man from a bug. She knows that worm Kern can never afford her. He doesn't make that much money. Besides, he can't handle a real woman. He probably has these little half-wit N-word teeny boppers running
Jesus
after him
Christ.
and that harpooned walrus Rhodes.
Well, that just escalated quickly. Fuck. And now, but also the fucking girl that he loves and pays for and wants to keep, he's just invited a grown man and a professional wrestler to fucking slap her on sight. Then he turns around and shows racist tendencies against Kern, and somehow Dusty is involved in this, and closes with, I'll tell you, no decent woman would care for him once they know the impotent jelly he really is. He's just an overgrown, retarded, goon-faced kid. Well, we certainly have separated the men from the boys here. Malka has moved. Don't even try selling your cheap shots to her by mail. Signed, and there's not even a regards or a yours truly. It's just a name there. Pernell W. Beecham.
Well, number 5 in the top 10, The Black Scorpion. Jim, any final thoughts on the trials and tribulations of Malka Rabinowitz and Pernell? What'd you say?
Beecham.
Okay.
Beecham. I seriously, those two crazy kids, star-crossed lovers, I hope they finally worked everything out. But I have a feeling that Steve Kern probably bent her over and dog-fucked her until she fucking squealed bloody murder, and Pernell got more and more fucking upset about it by the second.
She also has the most Jewish name I've ever heard of anyone involved with wrestling. Malka Rabinowitz. That's a winner there. But number 5, The Black Scorpion. Number 4 this week in the top 10, Jim, one of the all-time greats, Orgasmic Larry Nelson. And now the short form.
What's the stipulation?
Jim, Orgasmic Larry's popularity has never gone down. He's at number 4 this week in the top 10. What do you think about the reevaluation all these years later about the body of work of Orgasmic Larry Nelson?
Well, Larry, he just has such a full-throated release from his tension, so to speak. It's just, he's all into it. And I think that's why he's popular time and time again, because people can detect the authenticity, the genuineness in his exclamation of orgasmic delight.
Look out, Baron von Raschke! Oh, jeez, oh, gravity!
He really is just incredible. Everything he says is hysterical. When you watch him, he's always like moving, like his whole body. I mean, he's on coke. I mean, that's part of the reason, but he's like always moving around and is like making facial expressions and just acting goofy. And he's someone who everyone hated back then, but it's so much fun to watch him now. And you realize that so many of the commentators, Ed Whalen stays where he is, but someone like Larry Nelson, who we thought of as being substandard in the 80s, he would be one of the best guys in the wrestling business today because he actually knew what he was doing.
Yeah, well, the bar has lowered across the board in just American human life. So, and that wrestling is no exception.
Well, there he is at number 4 this week in the top 10, orgasmic Larry Nelson.
Are we having fun, people?
No,
At number 3 in the top 10, disappointed Lance Russell.
Look out!
Jim, what's the funniest Lance Russell story you know?
Oh, good Lord. Now, see, now, as my mom would say, you've scared it out of me. Anything I say now will be the funniest thing you ever said. But no, Lance, the beauty of Lance's style was that he could contribute to the funny situations and make them funnier by being the straight guy and being serious and because he was in the scene, you believed it was what was really going on was somehow legitimate. So you could be funny around Lance. Jimmy Hart, right? It was fucking hilarious, but they still accomplished what they were trying to do, which was get heat on Jimmy and get people want to see him beat up and to get people to want to see Lawler beat him up. And it was as Ole would say, a dog and pony show, but because of Lance, it worked. So Lance was often unintentionally funny with that grace. Come on now, Jerry. Well, we told you when he pitched to the big midget match coming up after the break, or was selling Homer Odell when he'd had a bucket of yellow paint turned over his head. But Lance was your next door neighbor or your favorite uncle or, as time went on, your grandfather that was trying to ride legitimate herd and be this, announcer and friendly, but professional television guy with all this fucking chaos and all this goddamn lunatics bouncing around him. So Lance was the whole anchor of the thing and the whole reason why that it worked. And if you go back and look, the corny jokes that he might crack were never really funny, but he'd be funny without trying to be. But more importantly than that, he anchored the show, so you could do all kinds of shit because as long as Lance was telling you it was legitimate, it was.
What about those videos that have gone around, and I know they originally come from you, of Lawler and Lance pranking? Was it the athletic commission doctor?
Oh, God. Well, yeah, there's several. They've saved. And the reason why is just because, it was so funny that people were fucking with Lance and he had such great, responses. He'd crack right up. But Al Costello was doing a local promo one time and was telling fart jokes in Memphis, and they saved that. And Lawler had it, and I ended up copying it from him when I got my first VCR. I borrowed all of his tapes. But one of them, they shot this in Evansville when Lance had to be there to shoot something for some reason. And there was in Evansville in those days, this was like 1977-ish. There was a guy named Doc Schriefer. Was this old? I mean, he was so old, my God, he was ready to turn into dust. His birth certificate was chiseled in stone. He was just ancient. And he was the athletic commission doctor. And basically he would sit there, hunched over in his chair at a table with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth and take the guy's blood pressure and look in their eyes with a flashlight. I guarantee you he couldn't see as far as another human being. And that was their complete physical examination for the state of Indiana to wrestle. And I don't know if he knew how to work the blood pressure cuff. But Lawler and Lance tell Doc Schriefer one day that they want to interview him or doing an interview for the big TV show. And you can tell from the way he comes on that Doc Schriefer has probably watched television a time or two. It's one of those newfangled devices that he's not real sure about. He didn't know if it was going to catch on. But they bring him in and they say, well, you examine the wrestlers. And he kind of, I do that for the athletic commission. I'll check their heart and their blood pressure and their pulse, make sure they're all ready to go. And Lawler's starting to crack a little bit. And then Lance says, well, they take a lot of falls and a lot of slams and bumps and abuse and everything. Oh, yeah. And then the doctor, who's like 80, starts going, yeah, but, a lot of us, we know how to fall. I boxed a little, and we know how to fall, and Lawler's starting to crack up worse. And finally, Lance says, well, I understand when they get slammed over and over, time and time again, that some of them, and from the car trips, and also they get hemorrhoids, Doc, right? And the doctor goes, oh, well, I don't know about that. And then Lawler runs over in front of Lance and bends over and pulls his pants down and sticks his ass in front of the doctor and says, he sticks his finger up our ass so he checks to see if we have any. And the doctor turns red and Lance is fucking laughing. He was great with that because he could, from his years hosting in radio and television for 40 years, he could have a conversation with anybody and he'd lull you into a false sense of security. And but I'm sure Lawler put him up to it because Lance wouldn't rib anybody on purpose, but I think he went along with it to rib the doctor. But Lawler is probably the ringleader.
That's my favorite thing about the clip is just Lance and Lawler in cahoots together. There's something I love about that. Well, that's number 3 in the top 10 this week. Disappointed Lance Russell.
I don't want to see you around here anymore. When you get that stupid fool out of here, tell him in Mexican just to get out of here.
At number 3 this week in the top 10 is Hot Dog, or Hot Dog in Lasto, as he asked me to refer to him as. Jim, I don't know if you've been on since Hot Dog has been here. Hot Dog is a character who seemingly thinks he's hosting a wrestling radio show on some network that doesn't exist, so he takes over our airwaves each and every top 10.
So he's like one of those, he's over across the river from Del Rio, Texas. He's on an outlaw radio station. He's impinging on your frequency.
Pirate radio.
Pirate radio, that's where I was going with that.
He's on a tiny ship off the coast of the Atlantic, and I never know exactly where he is, but his signal overtakes ours each week, and we get to hear a little bit of the Hot Dog show.
How do we know exactly when it's going to happen, though?
It somehow always corresponds with his place in the top 10. It's one of those spooky coincidences that I really can't explain. We'll see what he has to say this week. At number 2 in the top 10, here is Hot Dog. Here at number 2 in the top 10 this week is the always popular Hot Dog. And I believe
Gobble, gobble, gobble.
There he is.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving there, partner.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too.
Yeah, Turkey Day is here at the mighty 605 FM. Yeah, I think Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday of the whole year, man. Well, maybe next to Christmas and my birthday, but it's right up there. Don't you agree, TGBL?
It's all right. There's a lot of good food. It's okay. I like having a couple days at home.
Wait a minute. You're Jewish, aren't you, Booby?
I am.
Do you celebrate Thanksgiving?
Yes, there's no restrictions on Thanksgiving celebration.
You do? Oh, okay. Huh. I stand corrected. Well, cool. The food, the parades and the football, it's a special time of year here at the station. And I think we have a regular cornucopia of things to give thanks for, don't we? I sure do.
What do you have to give thanks for, Hot Dog?
Well, I'm thankful for ratings first and foremost, or in our case, second and foremost. Number 2 in the ratings this week, brother. Not too shabby. No. I predicted it. Number 2. Nowhere to go but up, my friend. Oh, well, I guess we could go down. Whoa. Well, you know what else I'm thankful for? I'm also thankful for comedy wrestling and the strides that goofy gimmicks and exaggerated dopey facial expressions and cheap merchandising have made and continue to make. I think 2018 is going to be the biggest year ever, a real watershed year in comedy wrestling. If you thought 2017 was ridiculous, just wait.
Oh, that's not very promising, Hot Dog. That's not promising at all.
Well, I say that as a comedy gimmick character in all seriousness. Hey, I mentioned parades earlier.
Yeah, you did.
The 605 Supercast Thanksgiving Day Parade is going by the station right now. Can you hear it?
The Supercast Thanksgiving Parade? I don't know what you're talking about.
By on the street right by our station.
No, there's no station.
Oh, look at that. There's the Leap and Lanny Poffo Marching Band, led by the genius himself, going by our studio window. Listen to that. Listen to that. If you listen closely, you can hear them playing their rendition of the Santa Gold theme song.
Come on.
Isn't that great? Everybody sing along. Come on, Brian. Santa Gold, Santa Gold.
Okay, all right.
Santa Gold, Santa Gold. Oh, let me turn that down. Let me close that window. Hold on a second.
Yeah, close that window, please.
Hold on. A perennial favorite in the parade, the Dr. Jerry Graham balloon, is up next. Just rounding the corner. Okay, sorry. The balloon is stuck between two buildings. Shit. Right, let me just close that window and we'll come back to the parade later.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I don't know how much later, Hot Dog. We only have a limited amount of time for you here this week.
Yeah, I guess we are kind of pressed for time. Good call, Asta. But, we're big on tradition here at the 605 FM. Yeah, stuffing and cranberry sauce coming at you.
Oh, God.
Since Thanksgiving is the kickoff to the holiday season, may I read one of my favorite Christmas stories on the air?
I don't think we have time for that this week, Hot Dog, but maybe in the future.
It's a tradition on the show that
No, it's not a tradition.
I'm starting it this year.
Well, yeah, we've never done this tradition. It's a tradition on this show. All right, Hot Dog, we will have your Christmas story in the future on the show, I promise you, before Christmas. But any last words this week for the 605ers as we wrap up this program of yours and move on with the top 10?
Thanks, everybody, for getting our ratings spiked up there to the number 2 show in town. And I wanted to thank you most of all, TGBL, my good pal Lasto, and tell the paper bag assassin that I'll be over at about 10 a.m. on Thanksgiving Day. Don't forget to save a place for me. Hey, Brian, we gotta go.
There he is at number 2 in the top 10, the popular Hot Dog, or Hot Dog and Lasto, depending on how you want to refer to it. At number 1, the number 1 contender to
now you've mentioned hot dog, I'm fucking hungry. Hurry up with this show. I gotta have lunch, for heaven's sake. I could eat the crotch out of Oprah Winfrey's pantyhose right now. I'm so hungry.
You mentioned hot dogs. You like Nathan's?
Nathan's are very tasty. I couldn't eat them after dipping them in a glass of water like old Kobayashi and Larry Bud Melman, or who's the other fucking guy? What's his name? God damn it!
It's not Larry Bud Melman.
I know. Help me out with
Joey Chestnut.
Joey Chestnut. Yes, I couldn't do it. Like I do. The bun would be too soggy.
I always loved that Letterman on the very first episode at CBS at 11:30. He opened it with the big CBS eye, and then the middle fell out, and there was Larry Bud Melman. He's like, "This is CBS," which was perfect. If you were a Letterman fan, it was the perfect way to usher into the new era of the show. But once again, number 2 in the top 10, Hot Dog. At number 1 in the top 10, which makes him the number 1 contender, and which means next week you get the vote on this man versus the champion, Brother Midnight. It is Denim Fritz. And we have a few tweets of Denim Fritz here to read, Jim.
My boy Kerry just told me he's entering an ass-kicking contest. I don't like his chances. Gino said he laid the pipe with his girl last night. I had no idea they were into plumbing. Denim words of wisdom. If you're gonna crank your rod in front of a broad, make sure she's okay with it before whipping it out. The rumors about my boys being provided with hookers at the NWA convention are not true. It was Jim Barnett and drag. I once told my boy Kerry he couldn't leave his room until he learned how to tie his shoes. I didn't see him for 6 months. I am jealous I don't get 5-star matches. From this point forward, the Iron Claw is now the Meltzer Claw, and my wrestling arena is now the Meltzatorium. I feel more stars coming already.
And those are the tweets of Denim Fritz for this week.
Oh, good Lord.
The number 1 contender. For the record, you can hear what cracked Jim Cornette up and what didn't, so you know where his sense of humor is nowadays. Number 1, Denim Fritz. And of course, that means next week he challenges Brother Midnight, the reigning champion, the very popular character, one of the breakout stars of year 2.
The breakout star.
In many ways, what Mark Galeen was the year 1, Brother Midnight has been the year 2, and here on this very special anniversary spectacular, I'm very happy to say I had an opportunity to speak to Brother Midnight the other day, a rather interesting conversation about rhymes and the government. And let's now go to this conversation with Brother Midnight. Here to make a special appearance on the second anniversary show of the Super Podcast is one of the most popular characters on the show. It is the man who is the current Super Podcast Super Universe champion. That is none other than Brother Midnight. And I believe he is on the line right now. Brother Midnight, are you there?
Let it roll, get bold, I just can't hold back or fold. I'm a man with soul, in control, in effect, so what the heck, rock the discotheque. Good time is what's next, baby. This is Brother Midnight talking at you right here on the Super Podcast Superpodcast, baby. We are second anniversary super show, if you will. Brother Midnight has arrived on the 605, if you understand me. And we have mixed emotions, baby. We have mixed emotions at the offices of Brother Midnight, if you understand what I'm saying, baby. You see, we are celebrating. We are celebrating the second anniversary, baby, of the Super Podcast program, if you will. So we are jovial. We are excited, baby. We are over the moon, if you will, baby. But there's another side, baby. There's another side at the offices of Brother Midnight. In fact, we could call it, baby, the broom closet of Brother Midnight, baby, because as many of the students of Brother Midnight know, baby, a number of years ago, the government came in, storming in, shutting down the crusade, baby, seizing property, shutting us down, baby, alleging fraudulicious behavior at the crusade, baby. And it was never made clear, baby, exactly what the allegations are, baby. We never learned who the alligators are, baby. But we've been living bare bones, baby, left me with nothing but rented boots, baby, secondhand mask, baby, and sweatpants, baby. So we a bit somber about that, baby. But we are trying to remain positive, baby, because if anybody knows, baby, the students know, baby. If you are a student of Brother Midnight, then you know, baby, that hard times, baby, is not a failure, baby. Hard times is merely a struggle, baby, a challenge, baby. And always I got on my two haunches and rised up because I am, brother man. We bringing it back, baby. We bringing it back, baby. We rebuilding the crusade. And it begins today, baby, on the anniversary program of the 605 Super Podcast, baby.
There's so much to get to. After hearing that, I want to make sure my questions don't offend those learned students of Brother Midnight. The crusade is coming. Is that what you're saying?
The crusade is being rebuilt, baby. It might be a process, baby, because when I talk about government oppression, baby, when I talk about government oppression, it is real, baby. It is not a fantasy, baby. You can look around the broom closet of Brother Midnight, baby. You can see there is nothing. They took everything, you understand me? But we are in talks, baby. We are trying to rebuild because the students know the positivity that the crusade of Brother Midnight brings, baby, and we got to bring it to others, baby. We got to bring it to others who are on hard times, if you understand me. Things are in the works, baby, but it will be a process, baby.
Okay, the government has seized your property, but everything is getting back to normal. Brother Midnight, don't even know where to take it from here. You know, one of the things people on the show really love is your ability to rhyme, and we heard a little bit of that in the top of this conversation here. And are there any rhymes that you want to give to the listeners of the Super Podcast right now?
Well, let me suggest something before I get into that, baby, because I do have to take umbrage with a little bit of your reporting from yourself and your staff, baby, at the Super Podcast, baby. I have to take umbrage with the idea, baby, that some of Brother Midnight's rhymes, baby, are not authentic, baby, not original, baby. And I heard this over the email, baby. I don't spend a lot of time online, baby, with online communities, baby. Frankly, I don't understand it, baby. So people tell me over the email, baby, the fax machine is not working anymore. I've graduated to the email, baby.
That's good.
And they've been telling me, we've been hearing on the 605 podcast, baby, that you've been stealing rhymes, baby. But anybody, let me ask you, baby, did anybody on your staff decide to investigate the idea, baby, that maybe some of these rhymes are original Brother Midnight, baby, and the mainstream rap industry from the 80s, baby, maybe, just maybe, some of the individuals took the rhymes from the Brother Man, baby? That was never considered now, was it, baby?
I must admit, we did not investigate whether or not, in fact, Big Daddy Kane or anyone else took rhymes from you. We assumed correctly, as we thought.
You assume, baby. Now, this is the danger, baby, of living your life online, if you understand me. Yeah. Okay, baby, if you go for online evidence, baby, you're gonna see, baby, that there's one particular passage that has come into question, baby. I believe it's a Big Daddy Kane song. Down the line, I believe it is. That was the one where he recited, I am the regulator, innovator, dominator, creator of data, plus the imitator, assassinator, baby. Now, just a minute, baby. Notice he says, plus an imitator, assassinator, baby. The original line, and you will see it, baby, on the magic internet that so many people love to go to, baby. The original line is plus the imitator, assassinator, baby. So,
all right. Well, that seems like semantics, Brother Midnight.
It could be semantics, baby. That's not for me to decide, baby. Maybe it was legality. Maybe he was worried that there is some evidence that someone else wrote this rhyme and he wanted to shield himself. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything about that kind of deal, baby. But you see, let me tell you a story. And you can decide whether or not this is accurate or not, baby.
Okay.
There was a time in 1986, baby, Brother Midnight putting himself together, baby, as a budding performer. And there was an individual from New York State, baby, who spent summers in my hometown. His name was Antonio, baby. And we would spend time on the monkey bars, baby, 1986, reciting rhymes for the people, baby. That was the origination of so many of Midnight's rhymes. And then, a couple years later, baby, what would happen, baby? Now, remember, you decide for yourself if this is a true story or not, baby. Some of those rhymes that was recited on the monkey bars, baby, suddenly appeared on audio cassette, baby. Now, how does that happen, baby?
Are you alleging that Big Daddy Kane was, in fact, Antonio on the monkey bars when you were a child?
I'm not alleging nothing, baby. See, the officers of Brother Midnight, we are operating in a broom closet, baby. I cannot afford to get into any legality or any litigation. I don't want to get any letters from lawyers, baby. Let me be clear, baby. I am not alleging anything. I'm merely telling a story and letting the people decide. See, when we was on the monkey bars, baby, my gimmick was I was into the string rhymes. Well, I don't know what the rap industry calls it, but that's what I always called it, a string rhyme. That's when you rhyme the same sound and you put as many words as you can together and try to make it make some kind of sense, baby. The Regulator is one. There's a few others, baby. That may or may not have been lifted from Brother Midnight, baby, on the Monkey Bars, baby. Oh, how about this one, baby? When Brother Midnight opens up his rhyme booklet, baby, you might hear some of this, baby. And it may have appeared on CD or something down the road at the time. Was likely audio cassette or something, baby. But I will confuse and lose, abuse and bruise the crews who choose to use my name wrong. They pay dues, baby. And there was a number of them, if you will. There was a number of people made a lot of money, baby, while the offices of Brother Midnight run out of a broom closet, baby.
Well, Brother Midnight, another very interesting appearance here on the show. I am so sorry. I had no idea you were so bothered by our accusations previously about
Now, just a minute. I wouldn't say I'm bothered, baby. You see, Brother Midnight, at this point in my life, I don't get bothered, baby. You see, after the government came in and shut us down, baby.
Who's us?
Brother Midnight went through some serious hard times, baby. I had to begin to learn to manage my state a little bit better, baby. So I learned a little bit about different types of meditation, baby. Some herbal supplements on the side, if you will, baby. See, just a few moments before the call, baby, I just finished the Guru Ram Dass meditation, the Guru Ram Dass mantra, baby. And if anyone knows, everybody knows the Guru Ram Dass mantra. If you don't know, baby, you've been living somewhere without information, baby, but it goes like this, baby. Guru, Guru, Wahe Guru, Guru Ram Das Guru. You gotta save the babies for outside the refrain, baby. You gotta save that. What Guru Ram Das is the spirit of humility, baby. The spirit of humility is what keeps us humble as people, baby. So when the government comes in and shuts down the offices of Brother Midnight, wants the crusade squashed, baby, that's difficult to deal with, baby. And when a man finds his rhymes put on recording, baby, in the commercial area, baby, that is difficult to take, baby. But you gotta manage your state, baby. You gotta manage your state, baby. Like Rakim would like to tell you, baby, from Follow the Leader, baby. Remember this one, baby?
Eric B.
I could go state to state, follow his tailgate, keep coming because you came too late, but I'll wait. Back up your group, get a grip, come equipped. You're the next contestant, clap your hands, you won a trip. The price is right, don't make a deal too soon. How many notes can you name this tune? Follow the Leader is the title, name tag. I guess you know I don't have to brag. Baby.
All right, well, rapping Brother Midnight, I must say that was quite impressive. But as we begin to wrap things up here and move on with the show, anything you want to say to the 605ers who, in this year, in 2017, have really gotten behind you and you've become such a popular figure here on the show? Any message you have for the 605ers?
Well, I do want to say, baby, that Brother Midnight being the top 10 champion, baby, is really proof positive, if you will, of the power of the people, baby. Because with the erroneous reporting we have heard and we talked about, and the government shutting down the offices of Brother Midnight, it was up to the people to decide that no, I am not believing this. I'm backing Brother Midnight, and we are voting him the top 10 champion, baby. So I want to thank the 605ers, and I want to thank you and your crew, baby, and I want to thank you in advance, baby, for conducting a proper investigation, baby, of Brother Midnight and his authentic originalities, baby.
There you hear it, Brother Midnight making another appearance, and boy, are we pleased, and thank you so much for giving us some time, Brother Midnight. But on the topic of Brother Midnight, I have another announcement.
He's got such a busy schedule with all those therapy appointments and evaluations from the state.
No. Brother Midnight is a very busy man. He leads his ministry somewhere in Canada. But on the topic of Brother Midnight, another character we heard a few weeks back when talking to Stan Saxon, the man behind Brother Midnight, was Dr. X. A mysterious man that the listeners have been asking me about for weeks. Well, I had a chance to talk to Dr. X, and here's an announcement he has to make right now.
I want to say that the doctor is now eligible for the top 10 on the Super Podcast program. I want you to go to the podcast and you make to be vote, and you make to be say the doctor is number one, and I want the doctor to be a champion of top 10 Super Podcasts.
There you hear it, the big announcement. Dr. X now eligible for the top 10. You'll be able to vote for him starting this week at facebook.com/superpodcast. Another new character to the top 10 by popular demand. Dr. X is in the house, Jim.
Better hope Dick Beyer doesn't hear about this.
It's a different Dr. X. It'd almost be Dr. XX. It's a fake Dr. X, Dr. X.
It's Dr. XB.
Dr. X2. Dr. X2, like Mr. Wrestling 2. A couple quick notes here, Jim. Of course, I want to mention everyone, we've got a huge reaction to the polo shirts and the denim stockings that are on sale. You can get more information about all Super Podcast merchandise by going to our online store, tinyurl.com/superpodstore. And go there and check out the t-shirts, stickers, magnets, and so much more. We'll give that link again later on in the show. Jim, a couple of popular things recently on the show I'm going to ask you briefly before we go on to In the News. One of the popular segments has been Slaughtering a Sacred Cow, where you say something that could possibly be an unpopular opinion amongst wrestling fans or historians, but it's something you believe and you'll defend. Do you have a sacred cow you would slaughter?
Well, you didn't prepare me. Although that sounds awfully violent and cruel to the animals, but you didn't prepare me. So I'm just trying to. I mean, I don't know what a sacred cow is these days. Everybody knows Ultimate Warrior was a piece of shit, even though he's dead. I mean, in that vein of things.
I'll tell you one of mine that I've used previously on the show.
Yes, you may.
And I don't feel good about this, but it's just my honest belief and feelings. Dory Funk Jr. is overrated. I understand he was the perfect guy for the perfect time with the NWA title, but I can say I respect him and his body of work, but I'm never excited to see a Dory Funk Jr. match other than against Jack Briscoe.
Well,
and the tag matches, I love Terry in, and I always think it looks like Dory sleepwalking through the match.
But and here's the thing, unfortunately. Time was kinder to Terry than to Dory because Terry kept reinventing himself and had different looks and stayed on the main stage longer and et cetera, et cetera. Dory was so well thought of in his time because he was the believable world champion that was enough of a legitimate wrestler to do the things that needed to be done and at the same time could work literally with anybody. Anywhere for any length of time and not blow up, could do the schedule, all the things that went into being a champion at that point in time when the challenger was supposed to be the flashy one. Because the challenger, the idea of the world champion and the world title was what drew the money and rather than the particular champion, and the challenger had to be over to really get over. So Terry was almost, in some cases, I think some people at the time that because remember, I was around when he was champion. At the time he was champion, people in the business sometimes compared him unfavorably to Dory because he was too sometimes goofy or flashy or wanted to do his own thing or didn't wrestle a strictly world title style match. But things changed and Terry changed, whereas Dory kind of did the same thing he always did, and it got older fashioned as time went on. But having watched him, he literally could work with anybody, and watching him in front of people, everything in person looked like a struggle. It didn't even transfer to video as well, what Dory could do. But I see where you can make that statement.
And that was my sacred cow. Jeff Bowdren, a few weeks back on the show, said the Road Warriors weren't in the top 25 tag teams of all time. That was his sacred cow.
Well, but now, wait a minute. That's not, what do they say? Not specific enough of a statement. If you say best 25 in-ring performing tag teams of all time, then he's absolutely correct. If you say not in the top 25 box office teams, he's out of his fucking ever-loving fucking mind.
It was more the first than the second, but it was kind of a mix. That was kind of my argument, was the Road Warriors were perfect as Road Warriors. Like, they weren't going to go out there. The one team that Jeff brought up was Steve Kern and Mike Graham. And I said, you can't even compare the two. Like, one was... What?
Yeah. Except for Florida and Georgia, where they did very well. And I mean, they probably made shots to Carolinas, whatever. But Graham and Kern were a good regional team for a while, but change the business, have the impact of the Road Warriors, or the working ability of goddamn Bockwinkel and Stevens, or fucking, over popularly as with the fans and the girls as much as the Rock and Roll Express. None of those things were even close. Steve Kern's most popular tag team was the Fabs, for fuck's sake. They were a lot more over in a different territory than Mike Graham and Steve Kern were in Florida. So...
Well, now you get the concept of the sacred cow. I'll let you think
what the fuck? Am I going to fight fucking who said this now?
That was Jeff Bowdren.
Jeff Bowdren? He used to be sane. Am I going to have to fucking punch Jeff Bowdren now?
No. No one needs to be punched over the Road Warriors in 2017.
Don't make me come down there.
Where?
Well, wherever the fuck he is.
Okay, well, we won't make you go there, wherever he is. But, Jim, now it's time for one of the most popular segments in show history, In the News with Jim Cornette. And we'll get going with that right now. Jim, are you ready?
In the news, oh Lord, in the news.
You sang that last time we did.
You did not know that was a real song. Are you kidding?
Who sang that song?
It was in the news, that the famous fucking World War II band leader in the news.
Oh. It sounded like some Manhattan Transfer bullshit.
Or actually, maybe it was In the Mood. Oh, yeah.
That changes.
It's either in the mood or in the news or one of those things. I don't know.
Hopefully you're in the mood for the news, but I am joined right now. Last time we called him the Keith Olbermann of the Super Podcast, Mr. Jim Cornette. Jim, I believe you have some headlines and stories in front of you presently. And the first one, in what is actually going to be a 3-story look at Terrible Ted, is from Valdosta, Georgia.
No, it's not. It's Valdosta, Georgia. There's been a misprint. Valdosta, Georgia, in the southern part of the state on October 10th, 1970. This was carried by UPI. A 600-pound black wrestling bear known as Terrible Ted was arrested Thursday night and placed in the security yard at Lowndes County Jail after refusing to meet his opponent, Big Ed Williams. The promoter of a wrestling troupe traveling with Terrible Ted had allegedly advertised that anyone who cared to wrestle and pin the bear would win $1,500. Williams from Lowndes County took the challenge, but Terrible Ted's promoter, Al Livick from Jacksonville, Florida, refused, saying the bear was too dangerous. Williams took legal action, and the bear was impounded by Sheriff J.L. Futch. Futch said it was the first time in his 22 years in office that he has had to arrest a bear. Bond has been posted at $3,000, and Roger E. Douglas, one of Terrible Ted's 2 attorneys, said they are working to have him released and doing what is necessary to protect our client, unquote. He said they hope to have the bear released within a few days. Meanwhile, Terrible Ted awaits his trainer, David McKigney, who comes to the jail once a day to feed him. His case is scheduled for trial during the second week of December. This was October.
Terrible Ted arrested.
Oh, my gosh.
Have you ever heard of one of the wrestling bears being arrested?
Here's the thing. Dave McKigney was the bear man from Canada, and he traveled with Terrible Ted. And with this promoter, Al Livick from Jacksonville, Florida, it could have been somebody from the Florida office, or this might have been an independent show. And apparently they put because I don't think they would ever challenge a fan to meet the bear on a Florida office show. So point being, I'm trying to figure out why they didn't do it. And the only thing that I've come up with is that there's some fucking problem where the bear, because I've been told this before, if the bear was a female and was a certain time of the month, they would get very aggressive. and that there's a time where you shouldn't have them work. I've also been told that if a woman in the audience was at a particular time of the month, that the bear could tell and would sometimes make lunges for him. It was always interesting when the bear was around.
It sure sounds like it. Well, we get a little bit of an update a few days later, 4 days later, on October 14th. Again, Valdosta, Georgia. What's Terrible Ted up to, Jim?
Well, Big Ed puts Terrible Ted in Bastille, Valdosta, Georgia. Terrible Ted is still sitting in jail, and Ed Williams is apparently going to keep him there until he agrees to wrestle him. Terrible Ted is a 680-pound wrestling black bear, or at least he was until he ran into Williams, known locally as Big Ed. Ted belongs to David McKigney and is a part of a promotion for a group of touring wrestlers. McKigney challenges men to step in the ring with the huge bear and offers $1,500 to the man who agrees to do it. Williams did just that last week, and McKigney promptly withdrew the offer. Williams retaliated by getting an attachment against the bear, and the animal was jailed by Lowndes County authorities. Judge Omer Franklin ordered the animal freed Monday, but Williams sought and received another attachment against him, and Ted is still behind bars. McKigney said Monday his bear is 20 pounds overweight and is suffering in the hot sun in the jail security yard. He said if the dispute is not resolved soon, it may infringe upon Ted's important hibernation time.
And McKigney's money, because this is how he made his money.
And I was starting to smell an angle. But this Big Ed Williams character is getting known locally as Big Ed. He's getting a lot of mention. He sounds if it wasn't an angle, if they never had the match, then it sounds like he was just a local asshole that thought he could whip the fucking bear.
And they said, you can't work with the bear tonight. The bear's a little dangerous. Maybe the period, maybe something else. And he said, well, I'll sue. I want my $1,500 to fight the bear. They should have let the bear loose. They should have let the bear fight him.
Well, wait, there's a third part to this story.
From the next day, yeah.
On October 15th, Terrible Ted freed on bond but faces bare facts of trial, Valdosta. Terrible Ted was freed from the Lowndes County Jail yesterday, but the happiest one around was the jailer. I'm glad to see him go, he sighed. Terrible Ted is a 680-pound wrestling bear. Ted, freed under $3,000 bond, was jailed last week through no fault of his own. His owner, David McKigney, had refused to allow Ted to wrestle a 350-pound construction worker named Big Ed Williams. He may have been trying to take care of the fucking bear, this big fat fuck. Williams had responded to advertisements offering $1,500 to anyone who'd step into the ring with Ted. McKigney told Williams that Ted had developed a bad disposition and might be dangerous. Williams charged in effect that McKigney was welching out on his advertisement and swore out a warrant of attachment. Ted was jailed as security. Ted and McKigney left for Florida later yesterday, but must return in December for trial. I'm sure that fucking happened. A Canadian wrestler and a Canadian bear are going to be back in Valdosta, Georgia real soon, Judge.
Well, the promoter was from Jacksonville, and this is in Valdosta, Georgia. Would this have been an outlaw show in Georgia?
Well, yes, because and once again, Barry Rose or somebody in Florida can help me out, but there used to I believe used to be a regular outlaw promotion in some part of the 70s around the Jacksonville area.
Well,
so, but who knows?
Well, we'll see what we can find out about that.
Valdosta is also not 30 miles across the Florida state line, and Jacksonville's up on top, so it's very close.
Well, Jim, for our next story, let's go to San Jose, California, Thursday, November 13th, 1958.
Fans chase bad guy, one stabbed. San Jose, California. When Fritz von Gehring plays a bad guy, he plays a bad guy. Fritz is a wrestler, the kind they love to boo, but last night the fans in San Jose Civic Auditorium did more than that. They chased the villain right into the street. The bad guy had one friend, fellow grunt and groaner Clyde Steves, who was slashed in the arm while protecting his buddy from an irate knife-wielding fan. The troubles of Fritz and Clyde began when Von Gehring and his good guy opponent, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, started chasing the referee down an aisle. Up strode an unidentified fan, a sneer on his face and a knife in his hand. Steves, sitting in the audience, jumped up to block the knife thrust. He got it in the arm. Then about 200 of the 2,000 or so spectators took out after Von Gehring. Nature Boy, taking no chances, decided to sprint too. Steves trotted to a hospital. Unable to catch the villain or even the hero, fans started bashing each other in a wild melee in the parking lot. Police broke it up before any damage was done. They're still looking for a man with a knife and two wrestlers, a good guy and a bad guy.
What an amazing, there's no riot that's better than a wrestling riot. Because it's just chaos. I mean, they're going after him, they're beating up, they're chasing the good guy, the bad guy, then they start beating each other up. You used to see it was emotions. They would get worked up over this shit. I saw the nephew of a woman that had been to the matches in Louisville every week for 10 years at that point, and he'd come with her many times, get so mad at Jimmy Hart one night that he's the one that rolled in the ring and started wailing on Jimmy and got booted in the face and thrown out and arrested, etc. The cops would be on one side, throwing people off the apron of the ring while somebody's trying to take a knife away from somebody else. And it was fun. Not when you were the heel, but at least they never chased me out of the building. They've chased me away from some buildings, but never out of one. That's the one thing I've never seen in my time as a fan, but I've heard stories, Wild Bill Curry, it happened to in Montreal, of fans chasing wrestlers out of the building. Just imagine driving by and you see a wrestler in his trunks running out the front door, followed by the referee, followed by 200 angry fans who then start beating the shit out of each other. Well, Jim, let's stay on the topic of wrestling riots because they're great. And this next article is from Beckley, West Virginia, your old stomping grounds. Oh, good Lord. Yeah. November 3rd, 1960. Black Napoleon slugs fan. Wrestling show ends in brawl. Man hurt. A free-for-all broke up a WOAY TV studio wrestling show Saturday night, which ended with an 85-year-old Eccles man in the Beckley Memorial Hospital. William Thompson, 86, was reported in satisfactory condition today after being tossed around by the Black Napoleon, one of the wrestlers. Thompson's injuries came about when the Black Napoleon came into the audience to get into a free-for-all in which the audience and his opponent, Billy Fox, were embroiled. Thompson, who was sitting in the second row, was trying to get out of the way of the wrestlers, but when he got up, Black Napoleon hit him in the neck with his fist and picked him up, throwing him through the air, according to his wife's account. Boy, those wives really back you up when you get in a brawl with a wrestler in Beckley. Shirley Love, MC of the weekly events, said, "I don't really know what happened. All I know is that the fans were real excited and chairs were sailing through the air. I was on the opposite side of the ring and was covering the match in the ring at the time when things started happening." Mrs. Thompson has stated that she's going to press charges against the wrestler as she already has talked to Paul Forney, her counselor. Hospital officials were reluctant to disclose information about Thompson, but his wife reported that the doctor said Saturday night that he was in, quote, bad shape. She said, Sunday, he couldn't swallow, and his neck was swollen from his chin all the way plumb to his collarbone. His back also was injured as he was landed when he was thrown all the way plumb through the air, unquote. Thompson is a retired coal miner from the Island Creek Coal Company. He and his wife attend the Saturday night events whenever they can. 27 years later, the same thing happens, a retired coal miner with a wife that will back him up. Hell, he's in bad shape. I don't know how he's going to make it. Why, he can't see out of his eye. I'm telling you, they get rowdy up there in Beckley, up there in the hills. That's the story, and we'll be talking about that on a future Super Podcast. Years later, of course, you would have your run-ins in Beckley, although no one accused, in your case, the Black Napoleon of picking up an 85-year-old man and throwing him through the air. There's no chance. But, and WOAY TV, let me just put this in perspective. When I was shooting Smoky Mountain Wrestling from 1992 through 1995. WOAY TV 4, along with another station in Bluefield, West Virginia, 50, 60 miles down the road, were the only two television stations in between Charleston, Huntington, West Virginia, and down in fucking Bristol, Tennessee, and over in Roanoke, practically. So this was 32 years before that.
They had a studio wrestling show on Saturday night on this TV station in the middle of goddamn mountains, and everybody watched that show. Shirley Love, the host, was a guy, by the way, not indicative of that name, ended up being elected to state politics for years. He went to the state capitol as an elected politician of some sort because of his fame in the backwoods and hollers up in those mountains from hosting the Saturday night wrestling show. And Black Napoleon was probably one of the main event guys. They had their local set of stars there that most people, even in the wrestling business outside of West Virginia at some point, had never heard of. But there's also Gene and Jan Madrid. Gypsy Joe was Gene Madrid, and Jan Madrid was his alleged brother. And they were two back when Gypsy Joe was a handsome guy with his hair slicked back. And but it was a small money, small time territory. But when you got a TV show or two up in those hills, you know, like I said, it was one of the only two stations for a fucking 150 or 200 mile stretch each way.
Well, Jim, I always get a kick out of stories where the fans get involved and there's unintended consequences. And that kind of goes into our next story from the Los Angeles Times, Thursday, November 6, 1952.
Pop bottle tosser given $300 fine. Brady Wilson, 50-year-old house painter who threw a pop bottle at a wrestler last June 4th at the Olympic Auditorium, was fined $300 yesterday by Superior Judge Thomas L. Ambrose. Brady pleaded guilty to simple assault as a result of injuring Lester Sample, 15... is the father of Junior Samples. Lester Sample, 5714 Cecilia Avenue, Bell Gardens. We got his address down there in case anybody wants to harass him. When the missile he hurled at wrestler Danny McShane missed the ladder, skipped across the canvas of the squared circle, and struck Sample.
You're sitting there, you're enjoying a wrestling show.
You get hit in the face with a fucking bottle.
Meanwhile, Danny McShane, he's fine.
Well, that's good to know, yes. Well, he had enough scars on his head, I'm sure. But that's the kind of heat that a guy like Danny McShane could get.
Jim, we have a couple more stories this week, and it wouldn't be an episode of In the News without a story about Eddie Graham misbehaving in public. I think we've had one almost every single time we've done this, so today should be no different.
With the date on this, Tampa Bay Times, December 28, 1959. Police charge Tampa wrestler. Tampa wrestler Eddie Graham, 29, last night was charged with disorderly conduct after police said he jumped on the stage and knocked down entertainer Charles Farrell at the Colonial Inn, St. Petersburg Beach. Graham posted a $50 bond and was released. Police quoted Graham as saying he was offended by a remark Farrell made on the stage. The wrestler knocked Farrell to the stage floor before being restrained by friends, police said. I know exactly what happened here.
What happened?
Well, look at this. This is December 1959. Eddie Graham is one of the top heel tag team champions in New York with the Grahams, with Dr. Jerry Graham. He's been main eventing Madison Square Garden. He's now in Florida being featured as a main event guy. He's not out of his 20s yet, but it's a place that he's going to make his pretty much his home, and ended up buying the business, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes to a show at this Colonial Inn. And whoever this Charles Farrell was, the lounge singer, whoever the fuck, probably said something about wrestling and probably got his fucking ass handed to him. Because I mean, that's happened before. Remember I told you a story about when Bill Dundee one time almost got in a fight with Jerry Lee Lewis and his fucking bodyguards in Hernando, Mississippi, for making something about those phony wrestlers. And Terry Funk just finished telling me a story in when he was a kid. Him and Dory, like 7, 8 years old, whatever they were, at a restaurant in Amarillo with his dad and some of the wrestlers and their families. When somebody said something about wrestling, he said, I just watched my father just beat the shit out of that guy. And I don't think that guy thought that wrestling was a bunch of shit. That's what they did because shit like this got in the fucking paper and people said, well, we're not going to fucking talk bad about those fucking wrestlers or they will beat the fuck out of us. And it helped for quite a while. It was Haku when he bit the nose off the guy's face in Baltimore because the guy led with, hey, you phony wrestlers, or fucking John Stossel and David Schultz, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, Jim, before we get to our final story here, I do want to make mention that these stories come from the research of Scott Teal, and you could access this research, these clips, and so much more by visiting the Crowbar Press Archives on Facebook, and you can purchase many of Scott's amazing books by going to crowbarpress.com. The finest in wrestling history in book form. So check that out, and we thank Scott for all the hard work he does researching these articles. And Jim, the final story this week is from the Minneapolis Star, Tuesday, November 19th, 1949. An interesting little article here.
It's from a larger sports column in the sports section, but Matt Referee Explains. Wrestling breaks into the column as Wally Carbo Referee Explains. It seems like everybody in town has been asking what happened in the Luthez Sandor Szabo wrestling match last Tuesday. Here's the way it looked to me as the referee. Szabo slammed Thez with a backdrop, and I could see the boards jump about 6 inches into the air. What I couldn't see was that when they came down again, there was about a 6-inch separation between two boards with nothing but canvas in between. Szabo apparently stepped into the hole and, according to his story, called for time. Then Thez drop-kicked him and pinned him. Some ringsiders confirmed Szabo's story that he called for time, but the timekeeper didn't hear him, and neither did I. As long as no official called time, there was nothing to do but let the result stand with Thez the winner. It's easy to agree now that Szabo got a bad break, and I think this is the first time in the 5,000 wrestling bouts I've refereed that the ring itself has decided the winner. Comment from the editor: how often does a sports official admit his error?
Well, this is pretty good. This is a pretty interesting little article here. Wally Carbo, of course, would later be the promoter in Minneapolis.
And think about this. While I worked with Wally Carbo when he was coming out with Tor Berg and the crew from Minneapolis for the LPWA tapings in 1991. This was 1949, and he had already refereed 5,000 wrestling matches. And would go on to actually be legitimately not only promoter Wally Carbo, but he was pretty much Vern's money partner for Vern to be able to fully buy what eventually became the AWA. He had been around the business that long. It was just amazing the shit he had seen.
I have a feeling he refereed 5,000 wrestling matches just like Ric Flair slept with 10,000 women.
Well, no, I mean, well, let's see. If he was the only referee on a card with 5 matches, he did that 25 a week, 100 a month, 1,200.
Well, how many cards had 5 matches in 1949?
Well, but okay, then 3. Because I mean, even in the Midwest, sometimes they had the big 5-match cards, but nevertheless, you could do 5. You could referee 5,000 matches in 7, 8, 10 years, whatever the fuck. But in 1949, it's just amazing.
Just amazing. And with that, another edition of In the News is in the books. Jim, any final words from your news desk?
In the news. Oh, boy, baby.
In the mood or in the news?
In the mood, in the news, whatever. I don't fucking know.
There's the closing bell.
Oh, this is the closing bell.
Okay, well, that sure was. We just had a classy segment talking wrestling history. And this is how it has ended.
Oh, yeah, we wouldn't want to fucking trash up the fucking segment about the goddamn arrested wrestling bear.
Homosexual Jim.
All right. Well, let's now move on. Our next segment, I'm very happy to say someone who listeners have been demanding come back to the show. I was able to talk him into recording a few minutes today for this special anniversary show. Let's go to a conversation with my father. Here on the Super Podcast 2-year anniversary spectacular, I'm very happy to welcome back to the show someone who, surprisingly, a lot of people enjoyed his appearance previous here on the show a while back, and that's my father. Dad, you're on the line?
Yes, hi, son. How are you?
How are you? I don't think you've ever just called me son like that, so that's funny to hear. The last time you were on the show, you got a big reaction. Everyone liked what you had to say, surprisingly. How does that make you feel? What do you think about that?
Well, I was just giving my honest opinion. Wrestling today is, from what I see, is all glamour. I think back then it was in high school gyms.
Right.
And, the guys wore like Speedos, with tank tops and,
well, they still do all of those things today. You just don't see it on national TV.
Well, but they didn't have bellies. They didn't have beer bellies. No, they didn't look like Buster Mathis, the boxer, they didn't,
No, yes, they did. Now they don't. They did back then.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. They did back then. Now they don't.
Yeah.
It's all glamorized. In fact, I watched that thing on Ric Flair the other night on TV.
On the 30 for 30. Yeah.
Yeah, his daughter is a wrestler?
Yes.
She looks like these girls I hang out with would knock her out in about 2 seconds.
I don't know who you're hanging out with. We won't get into that here on the air, but what did you think of the 30 for 30 special overall?
It was pretty good. I mean, I didn't really know that much things that he had 10,000 women. You know, I thought the record was Wilt Chamberlain had 3,000 women or something, or Magic Johnson, you know.
Yeah, I don't think Ric Flair is not known for his math skills, so I have a tough time believing the 10,000 number.
Yeah, and then I didn't know that his son was a wrestler who died. He was making $8,000 a week.
I didn't know it was that much money either until I saw that documentary.
Wow,
that's funny
that's
you narrowed it. Well, I don't know how true that is, and I'm not saying it's false, but I've never heard that before. But it's funny you narrowed in on that because I'd completely forgotten since I saw it. But yeah, that raised my eyebrows when I saw that.
And then there was a McMahon on. Is that Vince McMahon's child?
I don't remember which McMahon. His daughter, Stephanie?
They showed a daughter who runs something.
That's Vince's daughter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, she's very pretty for an ugly dude like him, man.
Listen. Before you start insulting other billionaires here on the show, last time you challenged Donald Trump to a fight, and this time you're insulting the looks of...
Well,
Vince
Donald
McMahon.
Trump is just a bully. He's a bully. You know, he's just a bully. That's all.
And what do you do to
I'd
bullies?
love to see some... What do you do with him? You bully him back.
Oh, there you go.
You know, he's coming down to Florida. They already had a notice today. Don't go around where he lives. You know, Mar-a-Lago. He's coming down today for a week. So
well, that'll be fun for traffic. But let's get back to wrestling. Pop, the last time you were on the show, we talked about some of the things you had seen on TV, and you said you were going to watch some classic wrestling and get back to us with your thoughts. What classic wrestling have you watched?
Be honest with you, it hasn't been on. It used to be on ESPN Classic, ESPN this, and another channel. It's not on anymore. All they have is this Ring of Honor crap. You know?
You're not a fan of Ring of Honor?
Yeah, it's too. I don't know. It's too produced. You know what I mean? It's too cool. You know, I want to ask your audience too. You know, everyone remembers the old days, Killer Kowalski.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
But there was another killer. And I can't remember his last name.
Well, it depends on what year. In New York in 1969, there was Killer Karl Kovacs.
No, this is way before then. I'm talking about when I was 61, 62, you know, way back when I was a kid. There was another killer wrestler.
Well, there were plenty of other killer wrestlers, but we'll find out. I mean, there have been other killers, but we'll get back to you and let you know about that. Did you like Killer Kowalski?
Yeah, he was. He actually started out, he wasn't good, and then he became really good. They made him like, you know, he always won his matches. And you know what I mean? I remember Arnold Skolin.
Yeah.
Wasn't that Bruno Sammartino's uncle or something?
No, it wasn't his uncle.
No.
I think he may have been the same age as Bruno, but no, he was just an undercard wrestler who was friends with Bruno.
But who was Bruno's relative who was a wrestler?
Well, I think they may have claimed at times that Dominic DeNucci was his cousin.
No.
Or,
well,
I'm not sure. You know, there have been various Italian wrestlers in and out of the WWF.
Yeah, but, you know, when I was a kid, wrestling was enjoyable. I mean, it was on at weird hours. It was either on at noon in New York on Metro Media or WOR, you know, and it was on a weird day. It wasn't on prime time like it is now, you know, on these shows. So it was in a way, it was much different, but it was entertaining. You know what I mean?
Well, let me ask you this, Pop. You were an athlete and you were a sportsman to this day. You love watching sports. You love talking about sports. Would you say that Bruno Sammartino was as good an athlete as, say, Johnny Unitas or Cleon Jones?
Absolutely not. Well, I shouldn't say that. Bruno said all the wrestlers I always thought they were acrobats, or you know what I'm saying? They were they knew how to fall, they knew how to land, and they had a skill. Johnny Unitas was a quarterback. He looked like he had, you know, a load in his pants when he ran. But Cleon Jones, I think Cleon Jones might have been a better. It's hard to say, really. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because back then, you know, I remember they used to interview Bruno Sammartino, you know, and he was like, you know. But he was a great wrestler. He was him, Bobo Brazil.
What about some of the athletes that became wrestlers when you were growing up? Ernie Ladd and Wahoo McDaniel.
Ernie Ladd, wow. Ernie Ladd, first of all, was a much, much better football player than Wahoo McDaniel. Much better. I mean, Ernie Ladd might have been all-pro, and he was much bigger. I don't remember how big Wahoo McDaniel was, but Ernie Ladd was like 6'9".
Yeah.
And three something, and he was a big dude. But to me, he could have killed anyone he wanted to really kill. Whereas Wahoo McDaniel was Chief Wahoo McDaniel, right? He was,
I'm impressed that you know that. Yeah, I'm very impressed that you know he was a chief. Yes. That's
right. He was Chief Wahoo McDaniel, but he was a smaller guy, but he was acrobatic. He wasn't a good football player, but he was entertaining.
He wasn't a good football player. That's your verdict?
Yes.
And you're sticking with that. Okay.
Absolutely.
And a few more things before we go, Dad. And again, when you watch classic wrestling again, we'll have you back on to talk about it. But
yeah, just tell me when it's on. I would watch it.
I don't know when it's on. Let me ask you this. Did you have a favorite wrestler? I know you didn't watch it and like it when I was growing up, but if there was someone on TV, was there someone you found entertaining?
Yeah, I liked Rowdy Piper. Right. I liked Andre the Giant. I liked Bruno Sammartino, Bobo Brazil.
Well, that's before I was born, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I like Rowdy Piper. The guy who was the baseball player? Who played in the Cardinals change?
Oh, Randy Savage?
Randy Savage was okay.
Who was the baseball player? That's a great way to...
That's Randy Savage, right?
The Macho Man Randy Savage, yes.
Yeah, he was a pro baseball player.
That's right.
He was entertaining. And then, there were just guys you hated, too. That sidekick manager, that little weasel.
Which one?
With a sunglass. What was I? If you tell me names, he was just a little...
The little weasel
with the Southern guy, man.
A Southern... Jim Cornette didn't wear sunglasses.
Not Jim Cornette. It was a little...
Who the hell are you
small guy.
Jimmy Hart.
Jimmy Hart, probably. Just...
he was in the Gentrys.
I didn't like him. He was...
Well, I guess that's...
And I don't know, was Roy Moore a wrestler? No.
No, well, I guess that's it. That's a holiday appearance, and you didn't threaten to kick anyone's ass, so we've made a little bit of progress from the last time you were on the show.
No, but I think I told you the last time that some of these wrestlers, if they would have fought boxers, for example, they would have got their ass kicked in.
Like who?
Ali.
But, who? Like just an average
Marvin Hagler.
You think Marvin Hagler could have beat Andre the Giant?
No, that was a size difference. But Will Chamberlain would have beat Andre the Giant. Shaquille O'Neal.
You would put money on Shaquille versus Andre?
Absolutely.
Based on what?
The General. No.
Boy, Shaquille O'Neal will really do any commercial, won't he? He's on half the commercials I see.
Doesn't he do the General?
Yeah, how is that a real insurance? I used to see those commercials and think, there's no way anyone would send this company with this bogus little CGI General character any money.
Supposedly they don't insure in Florida, so I don't know.
I can't blame them. I can't blame them from that. What an awful place you live.
It's 85 degrees today. Sunny.
That sounds too hot. It's too hot.
It's great.
All right. Well, Pop, as we wrap things up, any closing remarks you want to say to the listeners?
Yeah, all of you have a healthy, wealthy Thanksgiving. And whoever you enjoy watching and wrestling, root for them. And never let anyone tell you that, you're crazy or whatever. Enjoy your life.
There you hear it, my father. Not a wrestling fan, but I'm very happy to have him back here on the show. It's a family affair here on the Super Podcast. From that,
you know what your father's next door neighbor said when your father announced that his wife was pregnant, don't you?
No, what did he say?
Said, "Who do you suspect?"
Oh, look at that. You got the A+ material today.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not going to pop for you for that. I'll let it die like a fart in church. From here...
a fart in church never dies. It lingers on. It's immortal. It's immortal.
Well, from here, it's now time for Book of the Week.
Yay!
And this week for Book of the Week, we're actually going to tell you all about the many, many fine items available currently at JimCornette.com and Cornette's Collectibles. Jim, what's going on over there in this this major business you have developed. You're so busy, I can never get you on the phone anymore. You're always running. You have like an assembly line in the house. You have people running to the post office.
It's just, it's crazy. And poor John the Hunchback at the post office. We've talked about him before on The Experience, but he can't handle the volume. But book of the week, you're fudging a little bit because I do have books for sale, including Tuesday Night at the Gardens, A History of Pro Wrestling in Louisville, and Rags, Paper, and Pens, The Merchandising of Memphis Wrestling. There are books there at JimCornette.com, but right now we're just smack dab in the middle, just plumb right in dead center of the huge DVD classic wrestling $10 DVD bonanza sale, where all these incredible DVDs are on sale for $10 a piece. I mean, starting a classic wrestling action starting at as little as $1 per hour. For DVDs you can have on your shelf in attractive cases, the whole 9 yards, plus all the favorite T-shirts. Thank you, fuck you, bye. Cornette face, the action figures, is so much more. Just you can go to JimCornette.com, click on collectibles, go right to the whole listing of everything. You can find out what's there and order early and often for Christmas. Makes great gifts for the wrestling fan and the family. And the thank you, fuck you, bye T-shirts work well for holiday parties.
There you go, JimCornette.com. But for everything else you need, from books, the videos, clothing, food, whatever it is, you can
the burger towels,
Well, yes, you can get the burger towels at JimCornette.com, but for everything else.
Yes, I forgot about the burger towels, but for everything else,
you can go to tinyurl.com/superpod. Amazon. That is the show Amazon referral link. By using that link, you spend the same amount of money you would normally spend at Amazon, but we get a little bit of love and support from our partners over there. It's a great way to support this show. You enjoy the show the way it is, ad-free, without tons and tons of ads and sponsors. A great way to keep it that way is by supporting the show by doing nothing different than you would normally do. Make all the purchases. Buy your mistress something. Buy something for your in-laws. Buy something for your boyfriend. Who knows what you got going on? You need to buy. And the holidays are coming up. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. What do you get someone from Kwanzaa? It's a great question. I don't know what it is, but you get it at tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. Jim, I don't know if you know this because you don't listen to other podcasts. Lots of podcasts have links they try to tell you to use. Big shows, those big motherfuckers with all the money at Podcast One, they want you to use their links.
Why would we use their link? They've got enough links. Let somebody else have some links.
The little shitty shows with bad audio and bad hosts and bad guests and nothing redeemable about them at all. They want you to use their links.
Well, I don't see any reason to do that either.
Well, I think when the 605ers take a breath, sit down and think about it, the decision will be clear. There's only one decision you can make. When it comes down to it, when it comes down to us or them, fuck those guys! Support the Super Podcast. Support your Super Podcast. Jim, it is now time for the main event of the evening. It is the popular Superpodcast Roundtable returning this week, and we have a very special extended roundtable this week. Popular co-host Jeff Bowdren, popular co-host Kurt Brown will be joined by Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Dave went to Japan many times in the 80s, and he went once with Jeff, and he went famously in 1990 with Kurt, and we're going to have them.
And he went a couple of times with Dr. Mike Lano also.
Well, Dr. Mike Lano will come up in this conversation. I assure you there was a question I just needed to know the answer to. But here's Dave Meltzer, Kurt Brown, and Jeff Bowdren talking about their experiences in Japan and Japanese wrestling in the 80s overall. Let's now go to the Superpodcast Roundtable. It's now time for one of the most popular segments in Super Podcast history, the Super Podcast Roundtable. And today we have three very special guests, one of whom was in love with Bull Nakano, one of whom was hit on by Bull Nakano, and one of whom observed it all and lived to tell about it. And I want to welcome Dave Meltzer, Kurt Brown, and Jeff Bowdren to the show. And now everyone's going to talk over each other, and it'll be a disaster, but everyone's here. Guys,
and now we're all silent.
I can either confirm or deny those allegations.
Well, guys, what we're going to talk about today is Japanese wrestling, especially in the 80s, and the trips you guys took to Japan. And if I can, I'd like to start with just your first impressions and when you first saw it. And Kurt, I'll start with you. And for this exercise, let's disqualify you seeing All Japan Women on TV in the late 70s in California. Let's go to just when you saw All Japan and New Japan. When did you first see it, and what were your first thoughts?
I first saw New Japan actually when I first knew Dave Meltzer, and Dave sent me a tape that had it had a lot of stuff on it, from the Slaughter Patterson alley fight to Flair versus Kerry Von Erich. But what totally stole it for me was the New Japan in early '83. It had the famous Dynamite Kid versus Tiger Mask match in April. And Dave, do you remember the six-man tag that featured Shoshu, Killer Khan, Shoshu Hamaguchi and Yatsu against Killer Khan, Osamu Teranishi, and I can't remember who the third one was. And they just suplexed Hamaguchi into oblivion and took apart the ring at the end.
They did one finisher after another on the guy, and at that point in time, we'd never seen anything like that. I mean, we'd never seen anything like any of the moves, and they did like 10 of them in a row. Yeah,
he was amazing, and it meant something too, because after suplexing Hamaguchi all that time, they carry him out after the match.
Yeah, that's before Hamaguchi ended up going with Choshu, because that was the Choshu's army against IWE group. But it was that's when like the Choshu group started really getting hot in New Japan. He'd actually gotten hot about a year earlier, but it was like Riki Choshu was hot, but that was for a while there. Then like that whole Choshu's army got hot, and then of course they switched to All Japan in '84.
And the emphasis on the junior heavyweights, and plus the international flavor was there's nothing like it, because you got people from everywhere, from Mexico, England, Germany. Yeah, I mean it was a big buffet.
Yeah, I used to love when they would bring, New Japan would bring, because All Japan was pretty Americanized. And, it was really like, Brody and Hansen and the Funks kind of dominated with Tsuruta and Tenryu and all them. But it was these, guys that you already saw in the United States. But New Japan would bring you these, like Karl Gotch, as old as he was, or, guys that did like completely different styles. And, of course, the junior heavyweights, which were kind of an amalgamation, because Sayama was the key guy. So Sayama was a combination of Japanese training, but British style and Mexican style. And, like all those places had styles, but there was no amalgamation of the three styles until really Sayama and Dynamite Kid were like, and Rollerball Rocco and those guys were like the guys who really like kind of put that all together. And I know that when I first started seeing them, and I'm sure other people thought this as well, but it was like, this is the future of pro wrestling. It's going to be like this. And I mean, it took a long time, but it did end up being the future of pro wrestling. And God, I remember all those years where like, the American promoters were just like, no one's going to ever buy guys. This is like a joke. These guys will never. And I'm going like, I've already seen it. It works. I bring the tapes to my friends in college who aren't even wrestling fans, and they love that, and they won't watch American wrestling. And it's like, I know it's going to work, but it was just like, that old hard-headedness in wrestling. And, it takes a long time to, you're taught one thing that, unless you're 220 pounds, you can't be a pro wrestler.
Yeah, and, I remember that.
And, obviously in time that changed. But, yeah, that was like, I just remember the thing with Japan to me was what Terry Funk told me the first time I went. And it's pretty much true in the sense that you study Japan all the time, because as long as you do, you're always going to be 5 years ahead of the United States. And people hate to hear that, but it really has, historically been, as far as in-ring style, and a lot of business things too. It's been the case. And sometimes it's 10 years ahead.
Well, in fact, I remember you telling me that you talked with Terry Funk before you actually saw the All Japan women, and you asked him, I hear they're better than the men, and you said, Funk hesitated a moment and go, yep, they are. Well, remember how in the 90s guys started emulating the women's moves?
Right. Yeah, the younger guys would watch the All Japan women and start copying them. Yeah, and that style of the All Japan women, became kind of a template of not the full style, but of things to like copy. With both men and women. It's funny because I like today. You've got this is what's so interesting about the women wrestlers of today, and they're all different. But it's funny when I meet the women wrestlers of today, they'll always bring up, like Bull Nakano, Asha Kong, Manami Toyota, as like their inspirations. And before, like 20 years ago, they wouldn't even know who those people are. It was like because the world was so isolated in comparison. But I do know like when I first went, which was the first time I went to Japan in '84, was the height of the Crush Gals era, and like you just walk down the street and there's posters of Chigusa and Asuka, everywhere. I mean, you just know they're over in culture. They're not just wrestling people. And you see it and you're inundated by it. And it's kind of like, what is this? And I mean, it was funny because you'd have some wrestlers go, what a joke, 130-pound women wrestlers, ha, ha, ha. And it was Funk and Brody who were the ones going, like, and Funk was the one, like, because I hadn't really watched them. I'd seen them a little bit on, like on TV because the Fuji Network was on cable in San Francisco. So I'd seen some of it, and it kind of was like, it was so good that I was kind of like repelled by it. I had the mentality that some people have if they see like really good Japanese wrestling and all they've seen is WWE, and it's just like, I can't watch this. I'm figuring out a way why it doesn't work and it's no good. And I kind of had that. That's how I can relate to that. Is I kind of was like, oh my God. Or remember Kurt? I know you saw it. I don't know if Jeff saw it, but you might have. Do you remember the movie? And I think it was All the Marbles, right?
Oh yes.
So All the Marbles. I went to the movies, and the wrestling scenes in All the Marbles were so freaking awesome because it was the Japanese. Yes. The Japanese women were the stunt women. So essentially, you're watching, not American pro wrestling, but Japanese women's pro wrestling, and it's like the greatest thing you ever saw. But when I went there, it was like Terry Funk was like, you gotta study them. You got to study them because they're really good. And Brody was the same thing. They're better than the men. But other guys were just like, oh, come on, it's a joke. And the Japanese fans, the Japanese male fans weren't that into him at that point. It was like, yeah, they're good, but it's for little girls. And you guys know by going to the shows. I mean, Jeff, when you went with me, I mean, there were 15 guys, 10 guys in the Corcoran Hall total, you think?
Well, and there was the group of the Americans that were all cheering for Dump.
Yeah.
And then she was blowing them kisses.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, but no, the crowd was like 95% teenage girls.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Because I remember, as Brian alluded to earlier, my very first exposure to Japan women was in the 70s when they aired it on one of the local Asian stations here. And the wrestling was good, but it wasn't nearly as good as the mid-'80s. No,
right.
But what blew my mind was, one, the introduction to the show. The only introduction better than that was the CMLL intro in the mid-'80s where they showed the old clips of Galindo and Santo. But to see the beauty pair, singing their theme song while all the streamers are being thrown, and there's all these shots of little girls in clusters holding posters outside the arena, and I'm just saying, holy shit, there's no American wrestling that has this passionate a following that I know of.
Yeah, they were.
Of course, that was 1977 when LaBelle was falling apart.
Local wrestling was horrendous. Yeah.
I didn't have too high a bar, I got to admit.
There are very few groups that ever had that kind of reaction. I guess it's really All Japan Women, and to an extent, World Class would be the next one on the list.
Yes.
I think Mid-Atlantic in the Rock and Roll Express and Dusty Rhodes era was pretty hot. World Class was pretty big. I mean, the thing with World Class, because living there that 1 year, culturally it was real big. I don't know. I mean, but I do remember in that 97, 98, 99 period, even 2000. When WWF and to an extent WCW, Bill Goldberg and all that were culturally really big too. I think that was almost comparable, but Dallas with the Von Erichs and everything, it was really a unique thing that's hard to really explain to people unless they were there or were watching it as it happened. And it was a really short window, but it was really big culturally in the sense that everybody knew the Von Erichs and they were like, if you were in school, they were kind of like your, the fantasy, boyfriends of all the girls and the big brothers of all the boys. I mean, it was really like a weird cultural thing that I never saw anywhere else in wrestling in the United States anyway.
I think, Dave, one of the differences when you're comparing World Class to the All Japan Women is I actually printed out the issue from right when you came back, and you were talking about Dump's appeal as a heel, as it were, where you talked about when Dump walked down the street in Tokyo, that the teenagers were afraid of her. Whereas right. I think like the Freebirds, it was more like you wanted to kick their ass, but Dump, they were legitimately afraid of her.
Well, she had such a great aura of being a monster that, I think that she was really like, as big as the Crush Gals were, without her, I don't think that they'd come anywhere. Like every great babyface needs that adversary, and she was that adversary. And Bull Nakano was like her understudy, her number two. But Dump was the personality that brought out and, made the Crush Gals such heroines for standing up to this, 250-pound face-painted monster that was hitting them with the tin cans,
jabbing him in the forehead with a fork.
Yeah.
And wearing the mirrored sunglasses with the swastika on her arm.
Yeah.
She was quite the visual spectacle.
Well, to take a step back, Dave, you said your first trip was in 1984, and that's an interesting time, too, because that's after all the internal implosions in New Japan in 83. You got to see the original version of the UWF when you went over in 84, correct?
Yeah, I sure did. I saw them probably right at their peak, the first version at their peak. Obviously, the later versions were much, much bigger. It was something. Watching people kick each other in the head really hard was weird to see. It was like watching combat, it wasn't, but the people took it as real. I mean, it wasn't, but they took it as real. But the thing I remember about it is they packed so many people standing room that in that building. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, you watch and you see the guys in the balcony and all that, but I mean, they had standing room in the aisles. I mean, if there was a fire or something like that, it would have been a freaking disaster. The amount of people that they allowed in that place, for the UWF, because I don't think they turned people away. Maybe they did, but we got there and bought standing room tickets, and it was just so jammed, and it was a great show.
Dave, do you think
this was different?
Dave, do you think was it just one guy? Was it Sayama or Maeda, or was it the whole group?
Sayama and Maeda were the stars, without a doubt. They were the draws, but I think it was the idea of people believing that it was real was the real draw. Because you remember, like with that UWF, it was really big in Tokyo, but it didn't. When they went on the road, they didn't draw that well, because the Tokyo fans were always like they were like ahead of the curve, and the small town fans were small town fans, and they, for them it was, they wanted to see the pro wrestling that they saw on television, whereas the Tokyo fans, they wanted to see something new because they got so much pro wrestling. That's why the first UWF really didn't make it, was because they couldn't draw outside of Tokyo very well.
Jeff, you, of course, ended up going to Japan in 1987. At the end of 1987, you met up with Dave, and Maeda is mixed in with this story, too, because that was the guy you really wanted to see on that trip.
Well, as I was saying a little bit earlier off the air, so I go over there, and Dave was already there with Dave, do you remember Johnny Black?
Johnny Black.
That was the guy that you were there with. His name was Dave from Philadelphia, but he said, "Please call me Johnny."
Cat.
Yeah, he always said, "Please call me Johnny Black. I don't want anyone knowing I'm over here." And
yeah,
so
Dave Cat. Yeah. I saw him in Cauliflower Alley the last year.
Anyway, so you guys are already over there. I fly into Nagoya. Somehow I managed, despite the fact I didn't speak the language, I got over to Nagoya, and I get over there, and it was just the craziest thing I've ever seen. I mean, I first, you would ask Kurt how he first got into it. When I began getting the Observer, Dave sent me one of his tapes. And I remember saying on another show that the match that really kind of appealed to me when I looked at the match listing was Greg Valentine versus Kerry Von Erich. And I thought to myself, I've never seen those two wrestle each other. That'd probably be an interesting match. It was the worst match on the tape because everything else on the tape, it started off with a match with Killer Khan against Ricky Choshu in a Texas death match. And I watched it, and we were laughing earlier. I said, that has to be one of my top 100 matches of the decade because it was the first match I ever saw from Japan. And it was just, and then of course it all leads into everything else. But the point you were making earlier, so I get over there and Dave walks up and he goes, well, hey, did you hear the big news? And I said, what? He goes, well, Choshu and Maeda, they're out of the tournament. And those were the two guys that I came over to see. and then I find out that Kobayashi's out because he's hurt. Funiaki has gotten in some trouble where he beat up a cab driver, so he's out. So one of the best guys.
That's right. I remember we never saw Funaki on that tour either. That's right.
Oh, so yeah. That was a hell of a way to start the tour.
Yeah, but we still saw like all kinds of great wrestling though.
So I was reminiscing earlier. I don't know if you remember this. We went to a small New Japan spot show, and it was about 40 degrees in the building. And one of the matches was Takada and Osamu Kido versus the Von Erichs.
I remember this.
You remember what happened? So
was it where didn't Murdoch like in the middle of the match go like on the loudspeaker and go, "It's Miller time," right?
No, he looked at during Murdoch's match. He looked at the referee and he goes, "Petey, it's time for the go home." So, but during the Von Erichs match, I think it was Kerry was working with Takada in the ring, and he takes him in the corner and he goes, "Go ahead, shoot your shit, motherfucker."
No, that was Kevin. It was Kevin.
Oh, it was Kevin? Okay. And
it was Kevin. He goes, shoot your shit, motherfucker. And then Takada's like just kicking the hell out of him.
I think he hit him with 10 kicks in 5 seconds.
I mean, yeah, it was unbelievable how quick his feet were. Yeah.
Yeah. And we didn't hear much from Kerry after that, or Kevin after that. They quickly tagged out. It was fun. It's very interesting to see a spot show in a real small town where they don't mind calling stuff out in the middle of the ring because they figure no one can understand them.
No one understands English except we're sitting there and we understand it. Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah, that was good stuff.
Didn't you run into the Von Erichs again in the hotel, Jeff?
Oh, yes. So we're in the lobby of a hotel. I think it was in Nagoya. And
it was Nagoya.
Yeah, where all the American guys are staying. So they have these Japanese, like the fanboys that come, and they all have these photo albums, and they give the pictures to the, like this guy would come down and they'd hand him a photo, and sometimes they'd autograph it for him, or they just here, I'm giving you this because I have this photo of you, and so Kevin and Kerry come down. And they start talking to us, and oh, what are you American guys doing here? Oh, yeah, we're over here to watch the wrestling. Oh, that's cool. So Kevin, it's just me and Dave. Kevin looks at us and goes, "Let me ask you guys a question. Any of you two know that dirt sheet writer from California?" And he holds his hand up in a claw. Like, if he meets Dave, by God, he's going to put the claw on him and really teach Dave a thing or two.
So you got there for both tag team tournaments, right, Jeff? It was All Japan and New Japan.
Yes, I got there. I think Dave was there for a little over 2 weeks. I was there for about 11 days.
And that was the year, did you get to see, that's 87, so that would have been Brody and Hansen interacting on opposite teams for the first time, correct?
I think Dave saw that. I came right after that card.
Yeah. I didn't see it would have been Brody, and I didn't see Brody against Hansen in a match. But they would have had a match somewhere in that tournament, obviously.
Yeah,
because
Brody and Snuka versus Hansen and Gordy. That was the match.
Right. That was right before I got there. They had the match at Corkin Hall, and everybody was talking about it. I got there like a few days after that. Everybody was talking about it like it was this, because that was another one where they completely jammed Corkin Hall. They had like 2,600 people in that 1,700-seat building. And, so it's like... And they did a no contest and everything, and it was building towards, they were going to do the big feud with, eventually with Brody against Hansen, which was going to happen in 1988, and Brody died right before they were going to kick the singles match off. So yeah, the last night was, it was Brody and Snuka, and it was Hansen. Was it Hansen and Gordy and Tenryu and Hara? I think were and then probably Tsuruta and Yatsu would have been the big four teams, and the Funks were in it that year too.
Yeah, I know the last night the Funks fought the Youngbloods.
Yeah,
that must have been great.
wasn't quite the equal of the main event.
No. But hey, Dave, from 1984 to 1987, and how many times did you go in between those years?
I don't think I went in between. Maybe once. I'm trying to remember. I remember going 84 and 87, and then I went about once a year through 96. I think I'd go about once a year, maybe every other year. So, and then I haven't been since 96 every year. Like this year, I'm probably the closest to going that I've ever been. If the Tokyo Dome wasn't a Thursday, if it was a weekend, I'd 100% be there, because now it's like I promised my son a Japanese trip 3 years ago, and I still haven't delivered on it yet.
Oh,
but it's like I don't want him to miss school either, and he's got school, for January 4th. But that would be, and unfortunately, as weird as this is, they start school here like on August 10th. So I couldn't go for the last 3 days of G1 because he was already at school, and I didn't want to, so it's one of those weird things. But I am gonna go soon. I mean, especially last year's Tokyo Dome. It's like, God, I probably should have gone. What an unbelievable night that was.
Bowdren may be hopping along there with you, I have a feeling, because he's a big New Japan fan right now. But between 1984 and 1987, had the crowd makeup at all changed in terms of how many Americans were going over there? Now it seems like every fan and their mother goes to Japan at some point.
No, not really. No, it's unbelievable when I look at at the G1 finals and I look at the crowd shots and I see people I know. And when I go to PWG, and I swear PWG, it's like everyone's going, oh yeah, we're going to the G1 finals and for 3 days. And it's like, it's commonplace. And I'm just thinking like, God, it's still not that many, but the last 2 or 3 years, from what I understand, the amount of Americans going to like the G1 finals in the Tokyo Dome has exploded.
Jeff, like around the time you go, this is when you really start getting into the newsletters, and also you went to Crockett Cup 86 in New Orleans, and that's where you found out about the Observer, right?
Yeah, I actually was sitting in front of a guy named Jeff Steele, who was a Mid-South UWF fan. And so we agreed to start swapping tapes. I got the Mid-South and UWF stuff, and he got the Dying Days of Florida. I think I made a lot better deal than he did. and what he did was, in one of the tapes that he sent me, he included an Observer. And I started reading it, and I'll never forget this, Dave. It was the issue right after Kerry had his motorcycle accident. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, what is this? Completely got invested in it, and that's when Dave was still, listing that he had Japanese tapes for sale, and I was hooked. Thanks a lot, Dave.
3 marriages later, and Jeff is with us here today.
Dave was indirectly responsible for, I would say, at least 2 divorces.
Whoa.
Well, he put my marriage to the test right away. I invited him.
You just got married when you came, right?
I'd been married 3 years, but what happened is I invited you to the wedding, but you were unable to make it. But as a wedding gift, you sent me just this huge package full of Japan tapes, and we even had a note saying, if your marriage survives this, it'll survive anything.
Dave was actually an usher at my second wedding, I might say.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. But yeah, I was married 3 years when you called me and said, hey, want to hit Japan? The luchadors are coming. And God bless my wife, Elena, said, hey, if we have to get a line of credit out to do this, you're going. So,
what a trip that was, though. I mean, when I think
that was a blast. I had so much fun.
Well, the thing about that trip, aside from the fact that we saw those awesome Japanese women's matches, and obviously, got to see Asai and Negro Casas and Blue Panther and all these guys in their own environment, and it was like the second or third, I think it was the second tour of the UWF, which was a, kind of a UWA-oriented Lucha Libre promotion. But the thing historically was we were there for the Misawa Jumbo Tsuruta match, which ended up, kicking off the golden era of All Japan, number one. And then when Tsuruta died, and then later when Misawa died, like on the network TV shows, those were so, it became this like legendary match. I mean, it kind of was like, even in the building that night, it's kind of like when it was over, it was kind of like, I thought like, oh my God, what did we just see? It was like,
oh, did you remember how we popped for the finish? Well, I mean, we both jumped up and screaming like kids.
But the thing that was unbelievable about that match was it's over. And I mean, I swear to God, I mean, I think that like 3/4 of the crowd was in tears. And I mean, it's more guys than girls. This isn't like an All Japan Women when Chigusa Nagayo is bleeding and all the women are screaming. This is just in tears.
And everybody's reaching out just trying to touch Misawa as he's leaving, like Night of the Living Dead. All these zombies reaching just to touch him.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's like, it is one of my favorite wrestling memories of actually being live at a match that was so historical, because it was like, that was really what kicked off of that big sellout streak that they had, Misawa going over. And like the whole knowledge of the fact that, Baba changed the finish, like an hour and a half before the card started, because he's sitting, remember how Baba would sit in the autograph thing, right? He'd sit in the back and there'd be all these people and then he'd sign autographs, and he was sitting there and everybody, remember like in line and everything, and these Misawa chants were breaking out all night long. And it was just kind of like, because Misawa had just unmasked, whatever it was, a couple weeks earlier.
And they had the Tiger Mask outfit on display in the ring that night, too, before the show started.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like all night long, Misawa. And it's like, well, it's like, I knew that he was kind of over with the unmasking, but you almost have no idea how over he was that night. It was one of those weird, spontaneous things.
I've never seen anything like close to that. I mean, the closest I've seen was I was there when Ole turned on Dusty. I mean, those are the 2 live moments that I remember the best.
You were at the cage match in Atlanta?
I remember. What's that?
The cage match in Atlanta?
Yeah, the WFIA convention was there. And what's funny is right before the match started,
when Ole did that promo, that's like one of the greatest promos of all time.
Yeah.
Oh, it was amazing. I remember before the match started, I think it was Barry Rose said, "Hey, since they're all in the cage, do you think all Ole and Gene are going to turn on Dusty?" And everybody's going, "Nah." And sure enough, but that was another time when I saw a lot of fans crying.
Yeah. Wasn't there one fan, the Jock, that you told me about that you saw crying?
Oh, God. He looked like a normal kid who would be like a Letterman in high school or something like that. He's walking around like with this just dazed look in his face, and he's crying, and then he just screams to the top of his lungs like in a really bad movie, "Dusty!" They don't make fans like that anymore.
Yeah.
It's still real to him, damn it.
That was one of the greatest, I have to say. I remember watching, because we got it on cable then, and I remember watching the TV the next, whatever it was, the next day or the next week. I think it was the next day, because it was the show on Friday and then TV's on Saturday, and always
that sounds right. Thursday or Friday, I think, was the show.
Okay, so yeah, they do the thing and they show the footage, and Ivan Koloff is there, and Gene was there, yeah, and just watching that whole thing go down, I just thought, God, this is freaking brilliant.
Yeah.
And then Ole did that interview, and yeah.
The Misawa Tsuruta match, I remember earlier today, do you remember Fumi Saito was saying, the rumor is they might be passing the torch to Misawa, and that piqued my interest right away.
Well, I knew that Misawa was being looked on to be eventually the next top guy, because that's when he unmasked. But I figured it would be one of those things like they usually do where, Jumbo beats him like 4 times in a row, and then finally, 4 years from now, Misawa is going to actually beat Jumbo. I really didn't expect it that night, but watching the match, it was like the match was so special. Just watching it, I think that just, and it was, I remember when we watched it, it was like, God, if he won, it would be so unbelievable. But I never really believed that he would. And he won with kind of like this reversal into a cradle type thing. But when he won, it was just like, because deep down, everyone wanted him to win, and nobody believed he would win because, Jumbo was just ranked higher, right? And Misawa was on the way up. And it was just like, the reaction of that night was so big, and it just freaks me out because it was just like a guy sitting there watching the fans milling around the floor and the thing and seeing all the Misawa merchandise being sold, just going like, this is the night. You know what I mean? And he sent the word to Jumbo, because the original finish was Jumbo going over. And he sent the word to Jumbo, and he just goes, Misawa up, and then the messenger comes back to Baba, and Jumbo goes, do we go by count? Do we do a count out? Because remember, they used to do count out finishes all the time then.
Yes.
Although but by 90 they were getting away from it. But in the 80s it was always count. They did a lot of count outs, and this is when Baba was getting away from the count outs. And I remember the story is like the messenger from Jumbo goes to Baba, can we do a count out? And Baba looks at him and goes, no. and that's the finish. That was the story.
What fascinated me just as much as that match, this probably sounds silly, but, we were talking about how Bob was signing autographs in front. Remember when we went to a spot show in one of the towns, and there he was behind the gimmick table in his trunks and boots, signing autographs? With his big cigar. That was totally awesome to me. I mean, when you see him wrestle all these years, it's Baba, but you see him up close and see just how fucking big those feet were, and it just looked like he was in his element, like he was having the greatest time just sitting around signing autographs, sucking on a cigar, and I don't know, that was something cool to see up close.
That was a big dude. You know what I mean?
He was.
I mean, it's like I know there's NBA players that are like really, really tall, but I guess at that point in time, it was just like, what a big, I think when you're in Japan, when you're bigger than everyone, and then you see a Japanese guy who's like 6'9", it's just like kind of freaky to see.
Yeah, we had both seen him at Cauliflower Alley before, but there was something about seeing him in his trunks, those giant boots, and again, the cigar that was as big as his head. I mean, that was something, and he just struck me as somebody who was living life the way he wanted to. He looked like he's totally relaxed and in his own.
Yeah, I mean, he was like one of those really incredible wrestling characters that I think like it's kind of too bad because it's been almost 20 years since he passed away. It's 18 years now, and it's like there's a whole like for a couple of years, it's like everybody knew who he was, right? And now we've got like a whole generation of people who really like they may not even know the name, but they don't really understand the significance. And it's like this guy was like such a monumental figure in the industry. I mean, just as a promoter and as a a hero to the Japanese people. I mean, as far as for decades. I mean, like legitimately, one of the 7 most famous athletes of the century, probably in Japan, whatever it is. I think they had at the end of the century, they had like the list, and I think he was 7th of the most famous athletes. Like Sadaharu Oh, who, was, and Nagashima, who were really famous baseball players. And there might've been a sumo here and there. And then Baba Inoki and Rikidozan, those were the guys.
In which order?
Nagashima was number 1. I remember.
No, I mean, which wrestlers and the wrestlers in which order?
Well, I mean, Rikidozan was way, way bigger than Baba or Inoki, but by the end of the century, a lot of people had forgotten that too, because Rikidozan in 2000, would have been dead for 37 years. But, Rikidozan was much bigger than any of them.
Now, am I remembering correctly that after Rikidozan died, it was a bit of a scandal because it revealed the Yakuza ties and stuff, and that Baba was kind of like...
The business went down for a couple of years, and it was Baba's popularity that brought it back.
That is
they
so
had
cool.
They had a couple of years where they struggled, and a lot of arenas wouldn't rent to pro wrestling because of the Yakuza stuff that came out. And then Baba, who had that sparkling reputation for being like clean, when he took over, it was like... he kind of brought like the late 60s, with Baba and Inoki's tag team. That was a boom period for wrestling. And then, then they split. And then in the 70s, there was some struggling. Both companies had their ups and downs in the 80s. In the early 80s, really, they both kind of like took off again.
Hey, Dave, if you could, just for the 605 listeners, try to just put into perspective just how big Rikidozan was.
I mean, Rikidozan and Luthez did an 87.5 rating on television. That's like double the Super Bowl.
I mean, is he, just to quantify it though, I mean, was he essentially like up there with like the way that Muhammad Ali would be in the United States?
Ali would be the comparison, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know I think that he, you could say maybe because of the war and them losing the war and his significance, that maybe he was bigger than Ali in Japan than Ali was in the United States. But I would say that's like the comparison. Ali, bigger than Michael Jordan for sure. People think like Hulk Hogan. I don't think he's enduring as Santo though. I mean, Santo is more enduring because of the movies and everything and everything. Because like people still know El Santo and people know the name Rikidozan in Japan, but it's from another generation for sure.
What about like Babe Ruth?
It's hard for me to say because I wasn't around for Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
Santo is still so over that sometimes when I go to the local Lucha Indie shows, if I have my Santo and Cavernario shirt, like little 5-year-old kids, hey, look, mommy, he's got a Santo shirt. Well, I mean, everybody knows him.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I think he's more enduring than any of them. But I don't think him at his peak was as big as Rikidozan. I mean, I don't think there's any, in that sense. But, because of the movies and everything, he was, yeah. Because, I mean, the biggest in the United States of our generation would be Hogan. And I mean, Hogan was really big, but it's a completely different level.
Yes.
The topic of Rikidozan is probably a good time for me to mention that I voted for the Sharp Brothers this year for the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. I think they can't be denied. I just don't think you could deny.
Look, historically, that program put wrestling on the map in Japan. Rikidozan and Masahiko Kimura against the Sharp Brothers.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen the footage of everyone in the parks watching, because in '54, not that many people had television. So they would have these giant screens at the parks, and there would be like thousands and thousands of people hanging everywhere, watching Rikidozan's, not just the Sharp Brothers, but that was the first one, and later like Jesse Ortega and the different guys that were brought in that he did his big matches with Luthez and others.
I want to do a little change of topic here. I mentioned Bull Nakano at the top of the segment, and I guess we'll start with you, Jeff, because we've all heard your story of your potential liaison with Bull Nakano in the elevator.
In the elevator, yeah.
I'd like to hear
one of the great lost moments of my life.
I'd like to hear Dave tell his side of the story.
So it's funny because I'm in the elevator when this is happening, right? And I'm actually seeing this, and like when it's over, I'm kind of like, I remember I look at Jeff, and it's one of those things of, did this really happen, or did we just like?
Unfortunately, no, it did not happen.
Yeah,
and Dave, you told me that story when I was with you in Japan. You told me that story, and I just thought, who is this Jeff guy? He is a fool. He walked away. He walked away.
No, let's be clear. She walked away. I was still in the elevator with Dave.
Yeah.
And then you saw Bull Nakano in 1990, Kurt. You've been in love with Bull Nakano for years. Your dream was what, a leg drop off the top rope from Bull Nakano?
Oh, yes, and then strangling me to death with those nunchucks as she stares into my eyes and say, tell me what it feels like to die. It's a fantasy I'm sure everybody has. I mean,
that's a little dark.
Have you guys seen pictures of Bull Nakano this year?
She's really looking good.
Yeah, she's really pretty.
But she lost too much weight, man. I mean, I can't picture her doing that leg drop anymore. I mean,
you wouldn't even know it was her. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. I miss the old Bull.
So yeah. Brian, now that we got back to the All Japan Women, I wanted to get back to that night, and I want to read Dave something. Dave, you wrote this back in December of 1987. You remember the 10-woman elimination tag match from that night?
Oh, God, that was like the greatest match I'd ever seen up to that point in time. Probably. Well,
this was actually the quote from Dave's Observer. He said, the main event was by far the greatest match I've ever seen live. In fact, I'd say without question, it was better than any match ever held in the United States in the history of the business.
Wow.
It was. It had to have been.
So
that match wasn't that match like unbelievable? It was like this nonstop match. And it's just, and it's almost like the heat. I mean, that's the thing, is the heat was like so off the charts for like the whole match. The people just screaming at screaming so loud. I'd never seen anything like that in my life.
Well, and at the end of the match, Dave turns to me and goes, that may have been the greatest match I've ever seen in my life.
Well, he's consistent. You see, that's a good thing. And that match did make your top 100 matches of the 80s in the 1989 Observer Yearbook.
Absolutely. It was amazing. And I'll tell you one other thing about that night that was that I remember is looking at the merchandise stands. I remember Dave telling me, the promotions from the United States really need to come over here and look at the way they do this stuff. Because of course, but it was absolutely amazing.
They do, but they were like, that's another thing where they were like, 10 years ahead of us. I mean, that merchandise stand with all of the different things that they were selling and the DVDs and it was amazing because remember the lines for the merchandise, and it wasn't like you went there and bought a T-shirt. It was like people had these bags and they spent like $100. Back then $100, $100 in the 80s, a lot like $250 now. But like they're just piling stuff in the bags between tapes and streamers and the different books and everything like that. It's just going into that building, Korakuen Hall, the first time to see All Japan Women, it really was like going into a different world, a world that I'd never been before.
Yeah, and I still remember almost 30 years later how over Chigusa was with that audience. It was just crazy.
Oh yeah. And not, and Dump Matsumoto as well. I mean, as far as in Bull, but I mean Chigusa and Asuka as well.
Sure.
But yeah, Chigusa was certainly the star, and she had unbelievable charisma.
And that night was the night of Devil Masami's retirement from All Japan. The
first of many retirements.
Yes. But at the time, it was incredibly emotional. Because
remember we were talking. Didn't you and I talk to Chigusa, and she said she wanted to go to Calgary and Boston? Do you remember this?
Yeah.
It's like, do you want to go to? It was funny because it was like she wanted to go to Calgary because in Japan it's like Calgary is this great metropolitan area in North America because I guess because Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith came from there or Bret Hart but it was like Calgary and then Boston because of the Boston Crab, which was like her finishing move. She wanted to go to Boston.
That's right. I remember that.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
I go to Boston Crab, right?
Yeah.
I think the only thing that night that we did not get to meet Dump after the matches, because I think we met either before or after the matches. We met most of the rest of the girls, and we wanted to meet
we met Devil Masami right before she retired. Yeah,
and we wanted to meet Dump, but Dump didn't want to come out after the matches. That was the only disappointment of the evening. Trust me, because the rest of the evening was just unbelievable.
Yeah,
Dave, I think I know the answer for you. Jeff, Kurt, did both of you or either of you get a chance to go to the Ribera Steakhouse?
Oh yes.
Oh yes, I did.
Yes.
I remember every photo.
Every trip, I would probably go 2 or 3 times, just because that was just what you did when you were an American tourist and you're in Tokyo. and you're going to wrestling, you go to the Gotunda Steakhouse up on the hill of Gotunda Station.
And I love the photograph of the Freebirds on there where they write something to Ribera and then they write, "Fuck you, Ole Anderson."
The one that I loved was Harley Race and Nick Bockwinkel, who were together in the tag team tournament in '84. And so there's a picture of the two of them together. And Harley Race, who took that NWA title really seriously and just like 6 times real REAL, underlined world champion. And then Nick Bockwinkel signs it like 2 times semi-real world champion.
I forgot about that. Yes.
Yeah.
No, the reason I said it the way I did, Brian, was because unfortunately, when I got back to the United States, I made the ill-fated decision to give my Ribera Steak jacket to the girl I was dating at the time, who was not one of my 3 wives. And that was not a good choice.
I gave mine to Bill Anderson because the only size I had was so huge, I could have used it for a sleeping bag. So I gave to Bill Anderson.
It's funny because years later, when the Ribera Steakhouse thing was in vogue again, I went to my closet and I'm just looking, and it's like I had no Ribera jacket, and I had several of them. And I just go, "What happened?" He goes, "Those things." My wife just goes, "Those things were so ugly, I got rid of them." I go, "No, my God, you don't realize it's like the ugliness was the charm of them, and they're like collector's items. The original '80s Ribera jackets." Oh,
it's like the '60s earth tones and tiki culture. They're tacky, but they're so endearing at the same time.
Yeah. It's like memories of like when the Road Warriors would walk around with those Ribera jackets, it became like the big in thing, or Terry Funk or somebody, or Brody.
Dave,
the other memory I have is that first night we went to Kirkon Hall for the Lucha show. And I remember when the show ended, you said, "We can't go yet, Kurt. You have to watch them put away the chairs and take down the ring." I mean, what? And they were like an army of ants. They did it so just...
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember how long it took. It was record time. I mean, it looked like they were in a competition.
Quick,
yeah, that was actually really impressive.
I was going to say, Dave, before we started taping, I was telling the guys, just because we were discussing when I was there in '87, what do you remember about in August of '87, Summer Night Fever, the New versus Now? Because I got a chance to watch that match for the first time in about 25 years the other night, and I thought the roof was going to blow off that place. The heat was so intense for all those guys.
It's funny because it's on New Japan World, and every now and then somebody will, I guess, stumble onto it, and when they, they'll tweet me, and they go, "Do you know what's the story behind this match?" And it's like you can't really answer in 140 characters. It was like you had to be there, you had to understand. But yeah, it was unbelievable the way the match was set up, the feud, and then that match itself, and the underlying thing of when Maeda and Inoki did the double count out, and it was like Maeda just raised his hand in the air because Inoki would never let Maeda beat him, so that was as close as he's ever going to come, is for them to go over the top ropes together in this match. That was you know what I mean. It was like such an unbelievable moment because Maeda was supposed to be the next Inoki. It never turned out that way, but that was the idea. But Inoki would never put him over to let that happen.
Well, and one of the other things about the match was you essentially had, it was really new versus old, but of course Inoki didn't want to be called old, so they made it now. But they had Kijimuto as the last guy on his team, and I felt like that night they really made Muto a star.
Right, yeah, because he wasn't a big deal then at all.
No, he had just got back from Florida earlier in the year, and he was working like tag teams with Koshinaka and stuff like that. But I really felt like that match put him over to the audience as a like the next big star in the promotion.
Yeah. When I think the difference between Inoki and Baba is I think Inoki wanted to stay Inoki forever, where those last years Baba realized he's not the NWA champion contender anymore. He'd have those 6-mans with, was it Kusatsu?
Baba, who often teamed with Masafuchi, Misawa Noe, Rusher Kimura, Egan.
Yeah, he put himself lower on the card. I assume he knew that he couldn't.
Intermission.
Yeah, he knew, I can't pass myself off the way I did in my youth.
Oh yeah. I mean, the thing, what was cool about Baba, yeah, and Inoki always had to be main event, right? And Baba was mid card. But the thing with Baba was he would do those 6-man tags. They were easy matches and all that. And then like once or twice a year, Baba would just do like a serious match, and it was so unique, and it usually worked. But he'd only do it on rare occasions. But yeah, no, I mean, Baba really by 82, I think mentally was just like Tsuruta's the guy, and Tsuruta was the guy from like 82 to 90, and he still was until his health problems, but with Misawa. And then in the late 80s, you had Tenryu as well and others. But yeah, Baba was, from 82 on, he never tried to make himself out to be the top guy. And he went another 17 years, doing the comedies matches. But Inoki, Inoki never wanted, the only thing that got Inoki out of the top spot was that he won the Senate race. I mean, that was really the thing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. The wrestling-wise, it was like, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, I wanted to ask you, this question came up the other day. When Shoshu jumped back from All Japan to New Japan, why did Yatsu stay with Baba?
I don't really remember, other than I think that he was more, I think that he got comfortable and everything like that. And I think a lot of them really liked working for Baba, but you had that loyalty. But I think that he just was, you got to remember that most of those guys were stars in New Japan first, and Yatsu really wasn't, and Baba picked Yatsu because remember when they came over, the tag team was Choshu and Hamaguchi, but Baba thought Hamaguchi was too small to be in the top mix, so he made it Choshu and Yatsu that were feuding with Tsuruta and Tenryu. So maybe there was that loyalty. I'm not really sure, but yeah, he wouldn't go back.
Well, on the topic of Baba, Dave, I have to ask you a question. It has been something talked about multiple times on the Super Podcast. I believe one, if not both, of the other men on the line have brought it up. It's been a rumor, so I'm going to ask you yes or no if it's true or not. Did Mrs. Baba ban you from All Japan because Mike Lano showed up with a group of people and said Dave Meltzer sent me?
Not banned. That's not the right word. But it was night and day, yes. It was night and day different. because at the end of the Misawa Tsuruta match, and we're all crying, seeing this amazing thing, and Mrs. Baba's crying. I remember walking by Mrs. Baba, and she gave me this towel, which was a All Japan towel. So she obviously liked me, and she was, and then the next time I go, I'm thinking, and then it's like where, she thought I was like some spy from like the, whatever, and like the talent that talked, was that talked to us was like, it was like thing. Cause I remember like Dory Funk Jr. came and just goes like to me and just goes, I just want to apologize for my boss. It was very rude, the way and it was, and I couldn't understand what the difference was. And then somebody in Japan goes, oh, Mike Lano was here like with a group like a couple months ago. And well,
he was with like Steve Gerber, Greg Regalado, Andy Dragos, and I can't remember which one of them told me, but they said he was actually screaming at Mrs. Bob because she wouldn't let him take photos, and that he was dropping your name.
Yeah, well, see, that's what I didn't even know this. I just knew it was night and day different, and then somebody in Japan explained to me, they just said that like there was a group of Americans that were here a couple of months earlier, and they were the ultimate ugly Americans. And now that's what this is a deal. So there you go.
With Lano as the leader.
Before I was cool because I went there and minded my own business and never caused any trouble, and the wrestlers liked me.
When I was there, Mrs. Baba totally loved you. She was like so jazzed to see you that time.
I know. Isn't that like the saddest thing in the world? And she didn't like anybody.
I remember Mrs. Baba gave us the Funks T-shirts and all the bunch of stuff from the merchandise table.
Yeah. So it's just like it's at 87 and 90, and I mean it was like, because every time I would come, like she was so nice, and then after it was like, and everyone would call her Dragon Lady and all this. And I go, gosh, she's so nice to me though. And then she was Dragon Lady after Mike Lano came. Yeah.
Well, another name that has not been brought up yet is Wally Yamaguchi, but I have a feeling he fits into some of these trips.
Hotel Wally.
We all stayed with him.
In fact, Dave, remember how we checked into a hotel, and that night Wally called and was saying something like, "You son of a bitch, Dave, why aren't you staying with us?" So we saved a boatload of money on like a lodging. So I bought so much stuff there in Japan, I could barely pick up the suitcase when we went back on the
remember how heavy the suitcases were when we went home? Oh my God, yeah. And that's before they had like the rollers and everything.
And they didn't make us pay any custom fee or anything. You could barely lift those fuckers.
God damn, we bought so much shit. Yeah.
I know. Remember the wrestling store?
Well, there's a couple of them, but yeah, I remember the one. Because they never had them in the United States at the time. So you go to the wrestling store, and it was like, oh my God, they would have like these magazines from 20 years ago, and all these DVDs from Rikidozan days, and T-shirts, and just like incredible stuff. I'm sure they still have them now, but
I remember being blown away how the address system is so whack there that we couldn't figure out how to get to it, and how that one waitress at the hotel or the hostess at the hotel actually walked us down the street to help us find it. I thought, damn, that's hospitality.
Oh, the people there are so nice. At some points, it's weird because they're so nice, but yet at other points they could be so racist at the same time. Like if you're doing the wrong thing or something like that. Like you go to I loved this experience in life, because not that I loved it when it happened, but I remember we were in a small town. I don't remember which trip this was. I don't know if you guys were on this one or not, but we were in a small town, and we stayed late, and we were trying to get a cab, and no cab would like pick us up. And like we would go to restaurants, and this is not in Tokyo. This would be in a small town. They wouldn't serve us, and it was like the whole thing. And somebody even mentioned to me, goes, well, now you probably have a really good idea about, what it was like to be black in the 1960s. And it was like, and when I was told that, it was like, I'm really glad this happened, because now I can understand that, which, you couldn't any other way. And it made me really hate racism, in a way that, in fact, I probably never would have learned to hate racism. I mean, I would have hated it anyway, but from the firsthand experience of actually, where you're, they won't serve you at a restaurant because you're American, or the taxi drivers will not pick you up because, you're American.
I'll tell you a similar story, but from a different angle. I remember when we were in Osaka, and I don't know who we were with. It was either Wally or Fumi or Koichi. And we're walking through, let's be kind, the red light district, and the ladies were out. And every time when we would walk past the ladies, they would turn away from us. And we looked at our Japanese, whoever we were with, and we said, what's the deal with these women like turning away from us? Oh, it's because you're Americans. They don't want nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Damn.
Dave, one of the things that is so cool from this era are those Japanese magazines, and there are so many people that collect them. I recently got a few old ones. God. I'm wondering, when you guys each first saw the Japanese magazines, but specifically Dave, what was it like for you when all of a sudden they started covering the Observer Year-End Awards in the magazines over there?
Yeah, I thought that, because when they did that was really cool. I started seeing Japanese magazines, I would like to say, at least going back to 74. And they didn't have the weeklies then. That was the monthly big magazines. The weeklies came, I'm thinking, in the early 80s. But I got them all sent to me all the time. And I took photos for when, not the Shire days, but the AWA days. I would take photos. I'd go to the Oakland Coliseum for the AWA shows and shoot photos at ringside for the Japanese magazines. So I was always getting them, and I think I got hooked up. Well, I mean, I was friends with Koichi, so he was always like the conduit to that. And I remember Dan Westbrook, who you guys, Jeff won't.
Oh yes, I know Dan.
Yeah. So Dan Westbrook came up and stayed with me one of the years when he came for the San Francisco Battle Royals. This is early 70s. And, he was shooting for, the Japanese magazines. And that's when I kind of started what is this and everything like that. So, and then, I probably have been in contact with Koichi Yoshizawa, I'm going to say 74. So that's.
Wow.
Yeah, 43 years.
I bought my first Japanese magazine from Judo Jean LaBelle at the Olympic in 77.
Yeah.
Jeff, when did you first see the magazines?
I'm thinking, I think Pete Letterberg lent me some of his Japanese magazines that he'd gotten. So it probably would have been the same time period, about 86, 87-ish. I was sitting there thinking, you were talking about Wally Yamaguchi, and I remember a funny story about when we were staying at Wally's. Wally had, Dave, do you remember he had like a ring, like in his basement or something?
The ring in like the garage.
Yeah. So we get in the ring, and we're, and Wally and Dave and I and Dave Katz are just goofing around in the ring. So I do this bit where I hit the ropes, and I'm running the ropes and stuff like that. And I'll never forget, Dave looks at me and goes, well, hey, you can hit the ropes. You know what that means? You're already better than Ivan Putski.
Oh, Dave, remember how I remember how when we were there, fans kept mistaking you for Chris Benoit and would come up for your autograph.
Yeah, they did that in '87 too.
Always. Well, the first time I went was before Chris Benoit was there, and they would always mistake me for Dynamite Kid. You know, and Dynamite Kid was super over in 1984. So I mean, it'd be people screaming and everything. You know, Kido, I love you. You know, in English. I mean, it was crazy. But yeah, like the '87, and it's the weirdest thing because I don't think I looked anything at all like Chris Benoit. But when I was in Japan, like I would say that and goes, "Oh, you look exactly like him. What are you talking about?" You know, it's like, and it's almost like the idea. I don't know, the idea that like all Americans look the same or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah, you know, all us honkies look alike. You know.
Yeah, but yeah. Because remember, I would in '87. I remember he he just started there, and he was Dynamite Chris, which was a name he hated. And I'd be like walking around, and people, Dynamite Chris, and I go, no, that's not me, like that. Yeah.
I remember at one of the small towns we went to, Dave, when the people would come up and go, Dynamite Chris, and they'd want you to sign autographs. And that's when I had longer hair. And Dave would point at me and go, see him? Michael Hayes. He's Michael Hayes.
Well, in fact, I remember at the Baba show, I can't remember what town it was, at the spot show where you were at, some kids came up when you autographed a T-shirt, and you started autographing their shirts just writing other wrestlers' names.
Yeah.
And then, I can't remember how we knew this, but we knew the next wrestler that this one kid was going to ask for an autograph was Dustin Rhodes. And so you just had this mischievous grin on your face, and you wrote in huge letters, you autographed Dave Meltzer. Because I guess at that time, Dustin was pissed because I guess you were writing critical stuff about his dad. And so,
yeah, I guess Dustin liked me because of what I wrote about his dad. Yeah.
Hey, Kurt, didn't you present an award to, was it Ultimo Dragon when you were over there?
Acai.
Yeah, Acai. Oh, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Wally just says, hey, want to give some gimmick to Acai? We could make up a trophy, and you could make some bullshit how he's like the wrestler of the year for your newsletter or something. And yeah,
yeah,
Cork on Hall, yeah.
I mean, that was really something seeing Acai, because that was like the tour where he first kind of like started to make it there. You know what I mean? Where he was like, because he was supposed to be the young boy, and Gran Hamada was supposed to be the star because he had tenure, but Acai just kind of got over as like a fresh face. And, it was the first time we'd seen like the Acai moonsault and things like that, all the stuff that everyone's doing now. But when he did it, the rope walks and things like that, it was like so cool. And the entrance music and everything like that. He was, because people don't know it, but Acai was the one who really ushered in, like Mil Mascaras was the guy who would have exposed the idea of Lucha Libre in Japan, but Acai was the one who popularized real Lucha Libre in Japan, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, that was one of the most mind-blowing experiences for me, is that first night at Korakon, we're at one of the restaurants downstairs before the matches, and there were Japanese fans with like Spanish-Japanese translation books.
Right, trying to learn Spanish really quick.
Yeah, and they all knew the customs, like throwing money to the wrestlers when there was a good match. That was so awesome.
Yeah. I have to say, Japanese wrestling fans in that era were, they were the best in all over. I don't know if that's still the case now, although when I watch, New Japan, I still think that they're pretty great fans. But I loved going to Mexico to see wrestling as far as the fans. It's different. And everything, but the one thing that I remember is the first time I went in '84, and I noticed the very first show I went to, and it was like, these fans are exactly like me, because I would go to like American shows, and it would be like, I'd watch the fans, and I was kind of like, I wasn't really I wasn't in sync with them, because they were always into like a lot of bullshit and things like that, or just easy stuff, you know what I mean, or they would be into the personality, but it would be like a shitty match or something. Whereas like in Japan, it was like, it's like you had to be good, and they just reacted exactly like I would react. It was really cool feeling.
Dave, let me just ask you a quick question. Something I noticed that you had written in that issue of The Observer that I referred to earlier was when you were talking about Dump Masamoto and what a a spectacle she was visually and what a performer she was and how the audience reacted to her. And you made a comment that if she had been brought over to the United States, that you thought within like 6 months, if she was pushed the right way, that she would have been on the cover of Newsweek. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, and that never happened.
Yeah, but I mean, do you could you have
our loss?
Could you have seen, like, is that somebody that Vince could have ever pushed? Do you think he would have ever taken a chance?
Don't you think in the 80s that she would have been incredible because of the visual and just, you know, but they never let women get so out of control, because one of the things, I don't think they would have ever wanted the women to outshine the men, because you remember when Asha Kong went, because Asha Kong was supposed to work with Medusa. After Bull got fired or left or whatever the story was, they were going to bring in Asha. And then Asha, in her first match, like, she did so much stuff and was so stiff. And, you know, they couldn't handle women hitting women that hard, you know, Vince and all them. And also the other thing is that they couldn't handle, like, women stealing the show. You know what I mean? It's like, how can we follow this? So they just sent her on her way. So I think Dump It would have been the same thing. I mean, like, they had what they were going to promote, you know, Hulk Hogan or whatever. And I don't think they wanted this, you know, Japanese woman with, you know, dressed up in Nazi regalia. You know what I mean? Like, you know, carving up women with forks. I don't know that's really what WWE would have. I think they would have been really uncomfortable, because one of the things, like, for me, and I've always had the idea of women in sports as it's the same as the men. It's like I never like if I watched women boxing, my friend, you know, and this is back in the 90s or whatever, 80s maybe, 90s with the Christy Martin era. Everybody be all, you see a woman bleed and it's all gross. And it's like, I see guys bleed in wrestling all the time. A woman with a bloody nose isn't going to freak me out. She's trying to do what she's trying to do, you know, and it's like, you know, more power to her. I don't have nothing, you know what I mean? And it was like with watching, like, Dump Matsumoto, the fact that it was a woman doing all this crazy stuff, it didn't offend me, because I've seen guys do crazy stuff. But in our culture, you know, we weren't, you know, in Japan, you know, it was still crazy, but in our culture, I think in a lot of ways, it would have gotten over like crazy if the promoter would have let it, but I don't think the promoters would have been open-minded enough to like not freak out over it.
Guys, as we begin to wrap things up, I want to ask you each the same question. When you look back at this period of time, the 80s in Japan, and for this exercise, we're going to include 1990, even though it's not technically the 80s, but it really is, as you pointed out earlier, Dave, the end of the era, at the beginning of the new era, with, you know, Misawa and eventually all the young guys in All Japan. And
right,
New
and
Japan.
then it was really just before the Muto-Chono Hashimoto era.
Right.
It was still the end of, well, I mean, I guess it wasn't, you know, it was the end of the Inoki era, I guess you would say. Yeah. And in 87, when Jeff and I went, you know, Inoki was still top dog. You know, even though he had slowed down. Jeff, you remember, didn't we see a tag match with Inoki and Murdoch?
Yes.
Where Murdoch was just freaking unbelievable.
Murdoch worked like 98% of the match, and then Inoki got in, and I think he worked like 2 minutes of the match, something like that. Hey, Dave, I wanted to ask you a question, because I mentioned something on either the 605 or my own podcast. Do you remember, and I think you're the one that told me the story, is it true that Joel Watts, you had sent him some videotapes of Davey Boy and Dynamite, and he had been trying to get his dad to bring them in, and his dad finally saw the match and said, wow, these guys are really good, and wanted to bring him into work midnight. And by the time they called, the Bulldogs had already signed with Titan. Is that true?
They had just signed like 3 days earlier.
Whoa! Yeah. Oh man!
Yeah. They were gonna bring. Joel was pushing for it for a little while, so I had sent him the stuff, and Joel Watts just saw them and just thought that they need to come in and work, because the Midnight Express were already gone. So it was going to be the Rock and Roll Express against the Dynamite and Davey Boy, who were not called the British Bulldogs yet. And he just thought that they would make great opponents, you know, just because it's different from the Midnight. You know what I mean? Just different. Yeah. And Dundee thought that they wouldn't draw money. I mean, Dundee was nixed it right away. They're not, these guys couldn't draw. So that was that. And then finally, Bill, I remember Joel called me up and just goes, my dad gave the okay. And I go, they just signed with WWF like 3 days ago.
Oh,
so
man.
It never happened. Yeah.
Now, Dave, there's something I brought up to Brian. I don't think he quite bought it when I said it, but like, we've known each other for what, 34 years or so, something like that.
God, when did we?
Somewhere around there. But anyway, you and I have talked about this many, many times, and I know you'll back me up when, you know, we've always agreed on one thing, and that is the fact that throughout his entire life, that Dr. Jerry Graham never told a lie. Nor did he ever exaggerate. You know, when he said
Dr. Jerry Graham is like this frickin' legendary character. Like you couldn't, like, honest to God, there should be a movie on Dr. Jerry Graham, except nobody would ever believe any of it. And it would all be.
That's why when people ask me you should write a book on him, I said, well, there's two things. One, who would ever believe it? And two, I couldn't just write a feel-good book. I'd want to know what made him tick, and it might freak me out if I found out what made him tick.
Dr. Jerry Graham, what a, you know, I mean, like the story about when his mom died. Oh, my God.
Absolutely.
Tell the story, Kurt, because that's like crazy stories.
It's very popular on the 605 podcast now.
Oh, you've already told us? Okay.
Yeah. That it's even Travis Heckel did some artwork involving it too. Yeah, well, you know, he said that when Great Gama wrestled Stanislaus Obisco, that Gama screamed Allah, 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 and then hit Stanislaus so hard on the top of his head that he drove him knee deep in the mud. and so that renders all mixed martial arts just invalid. I mean, that's the toughest man in the world. I mean, only in a Flintstones cartoon have I ever seen that before.
Yeah.
Well, guys, as I was saying before, as we begin to wrap things up, I wanted to ask you, if we look at this period of time, the 1980s, those trips to Japan and what you saw in Japan, who was your favorite wrestler to see live? Who was the worst wrestler you saw on one of your tours to Japan? And what's the best match you saw live in Japan?
Okay, well, for me, Misawa, just on the level of it just being such a monumental moment. But my favorite, and this will never change, getting to see Negro Casas almost every night. And not just Negro Casas with the cream of the crop in the ring with him. You know, still my favorite worker to this day of all time.
You know what? I think that, like, if we look back at guys that are still active now, I think that, like, the two iconic figures to me are Jushin Liger and Negro Casas as far as full-time guys, in the sense of, like, these guys are like, if there's like no-brainer there's to me, no more of a no-brainer Hall of Famer than like Jushin Liger, right? And and there's others too, but Jushin Liger, just because of, you know, how many years he was great, and Negro's the same way in the sense of, you know, it's like I started watching Negro Casas in probably '84, and Kurt, I think, may have been the person who like was the first one to like tell me about.
I was calling you like almost nonstop, telling you how great he was, because I saw him.
Del Santo and Negro Casas, and how great Negro Casas was, and I finally like got a tape of him, and you know, it was different. Like then, you know, it's funny because like now, I mean, I guess some people when they see Lucha Libre, it's still kind of different, but it was like I'm watching Lucha Libre with American eyes still. So a lot of the stuff, like I could see that the guys were talented, but I didn't always register with me until I started going. And then when you go, you kind of get in the flow of it, and then you really pick it up. Like you pick it up really fast when you go, and then you kind of see, hey, wait a minute, okay, this is what they're doing. So when I started going to Lucha Libre, everybody, you know, then I realized these guys are just fantastic. But with Negro, the first time I saw him, it was just like, this guy was like, he's like one of those spot on guys where you watch him and they're always in the right place at the right time to make the other guy look good. Like all the little things, they you know, like a Terry Funk or you know, someone like that. The guy, you know, the other one who like nobody knows, Kurt will know, and Jeff will actually probably know too, but Kurt really well. But I always think back, because people always go like, you know, who's like the most underrated wrestler of all time, and the name I always say is Jerry Estrada. That guy was unfreaking-believable, and nobody even knows who he is.
I remember him.
And it's a shame how banged up he is now. I mean, I mean, up until his recent injury, Atlantis stayed pretty fresh for his age.
Well,
I mean,
what's amazing about Atlantis is he did all that high flying, and he didn't have his first knee injury until he's like 53 years old.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, Dave, let me ask you a question. Kurt was talking on the 605 one time about a match, and I just watched it and was blown away. Do you remember the match between Sangre Chicano and MS1?
I don't remember it unless was that a super bloodbath match? Maybe.
Yes.
Okay, then I do remember it. Yeah.
The ladies at ringside were dabbing the blood with handkerchiefs.
Yeah,
while smoking a cigarette.
I remember
too.
seeing Sangre Chicana in super bloodbath matches. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was so over that they did the same main event next year at the anniversary show too. 2 straight years.
Yeah. Mexico's got some really cool history. You know, it's like a different world. But yeah, no, I mean that what was cool about that trip historically is, remember when we were in the weren't we in the van with Gedo and Jado and Sasuke right before they all started up and became stars? Do you remember that?
Yeah. It was before before they did the Sasuke gimmick and stuff like that. They were on the undercard.
Before they did their gimmick, because we saw. I think that we saw Sasuke's first match. I think. If not, we saw one of his first matches. Because Sasuke, they did the Sasuke movie. I don't know if you know about that, but there was a Sasuke documentary.
Oh, I didn't know that. No way.
Yeah. Sasuke documentary. And it opened in San Jose, and Sasuke was there. So I saw him, and he just looks at me and just goes, Dave Meltzer. And I go, you know me? And it goes, yeah, we were in the back of the van and before my first match. And it's yeah. And I remembered that. And the other thing that I remember, which is so fascinating today, is Gedo was there, and he was KT Takayama or something like that, or Bulldog KT, right? Bulldog KT.
That's right. Yes.
Bulldog. So Gedo's Bulldog KT, and I remember in his broken English telling me about how much he loves the Observer, right? This is 1990, and now I'm thinking that this guy studied the Observer and studied all the stuff, and then frickin' he's a booking genius now.
That's awesome.
I never tell the story between him growing up reading the Observer and Joe Silva growing up reading the Observer, and they're the two frickin' booking geniuses of two different sports. And people tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about.
And don't forget Jeff Bowdren, who was the booking leader of fantasy sports.
Jeff Bowdren. Oh my God! I remember when we used to do the Bowdren the Booker thing, and these guys in wrestling would go, "Oh fucking shit!" They would just freak out at some of the cleverness in that thing. It was hilarious. Oh my God.
Jeff, anything to say?
The book is forthcoming. That's all I'll say. End of the year. That's my time. End of the year. It will be going to the publisher.
Hey, Kurt, worst wrestler you saw in Japan?
Holy shit. Somebody probably on one of the FMW shows.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, remember, Dave, that was our first exposure to FMW, and we were saying how it's a Japanese version of Memphis wrestling with lots of brawling. I was blown away that one night in Kirkham Hall when, at the end of the night, Onita was thanking people for coming, and some people in the balcony were chanting something rude to him. And he said something along the lines of, "We may be garbage, but even garbage has its pride." And when he said that,
pride, yeah.
Oh, I love that line. And when he said that, all the fans went ballistic.
Yep.
And they start throwing things at the guys up in the balcony, including one of those giant dry mops. They're hurling it up the balcony, and a couple of fans run upstairs to the balcony. I don't know if they ever caught the guys, but that was so amazing.
Here's another one. It's FMW at that time. They were just starting, and look at they became this weird thing. And I remember, so we never went to the shoot style stuff, but I went.
No, and there were no New Japan shows when we were there either.
Yeah, but I remember going to in the 90s, going to see Rings, which was really interesting, just because Maeda was so popular, and it was a very different atmosphere, date night atmosphere type thing, where it was the rich kids, and the really pretty dates and everything like that. And it was I guess probably going, what kind of sport would do that now in the United States? I can't really think of one. Not really. Maybe, I guess high level boxing probably has that, but it wasn't that it wasn't that kind of a rich crowd, like a high level boxing or a big time UFC, where you're spending $1,000 a ticket. It wasn't that kind of.
But it was cool to be seen there.
Yeah. More than you would think it pro wrestling or something like that. Yeah.
Jeff, best wrestler and worst wrestler you saw on your tour of Japan?
I was thinking about that. Dave, was Wajima wrestling when we were there in December of '87?
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he started in that.
I think he was there. So I would say him, because I seem to remember him being pretty awful. The best, there's no question about it. It was Chigusa. And I'll tell you, Chigusa was so good and so over that I have a hard time admitting that Manami Toyota is better than her.
She was, though.
No, I know it's true, but I love Chigusa so much back then that I can't stand admitting it.
Okay, she was better as a worker, but she wasn't 1/10 the star of Chigusa. That's when I tell people that, I go she was Manami Toyota to me, as far as night after night, 300 nights a year for year after year, was the best female worker, worked harder, athletic, the whole bit. But she was never close to the star of the Chigusa and some of the other ones.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah.
You know, it really is interesting. As I'm thinking about this and trying to put everything in perspective, these two trips specifically, 87 and 90, it really it's two interesting periods getting kicked off. I mean, this 87 tour is right after the shoot kick, and that changes everything. And, you know, you brought up how in 1990, all of a sudden clean finishes became the in thing again. A lot of that had to do with the popularity of the UWF and the fact that there were
it had everything to do with the popularity of the UWF because they were getting popular with no TV, and Baba and New Japan as well. They both figured it out. You know, it was like the public was no longer, you know, they were getting to see clean finishes every time, so they had to follow suit. And it was hard for Baba because Baba's whole mentality was the top stars never lost. And now you had to really, it made booking a lot harder because now you had to figure out the top stars have to lose, but you still got to keep them as top stars still. So it was
Dave, let me ask you, tell me if I'm right or wrong on this. Can you see after Maeda leaves New Japan and he forms the old UWF, and then we got, you know, UWFI rings, can you see a timeline or a link to the eventual formation of UFC?
Well, UWFI to UFC, yes, because Funaki and Suzuki were in UWFI, and Karl Gotch always wanted to take it real. And then finally, like Funaki and Suzuki and Ken Shamrock, you know, were the masterminds of going real. It didn't lead to UFC. UFC really came from Art Davie, and Horian Gracie. So it's a different line of shooters. It's the Brazilian shooters, but the Japanese shooters formed Pancras. So, which led to, you know, Rings, which ended up going real, and the Rings was the place that introduced Fedor Emelianenko and Nogueira and places like that, and of course UWFI introduced Sakuraba, and those guys all became big with Pride. So the Pride thing, you know, Pride 100% stemmed from pro wrestling, and I mean, people, you know, a lot of people in MMA don't really understand that. And Pride, you know, really, Pride was a pro wrestling promotion. I mean, you know, the big star was Antonio Inoki. It was booked like it was a pro wrestling promotion. They did squash matches like pro wrestling. They marketed stars like pro wrestling. They did special effects that I remember seeing on the ring shows, but they did it even more elaborate in Pride. But yeah, I mean, like UFC to me is not pro wrestling and never was. But, you know, K1, you know, which again, Ishii, Kazuyoshi Ishii, who was the guy who headed K1, I mean, he learned all of his things from Rings and Maeda on how to present a show. And then they broke off and he did his own show, which was K1. And, you know, K1 had that great run there as well. So the K1 and the Pride, yeah, that's all influenced heavily by the presentation of pro wrestling.
When the UWF blows up in 1988 in Tokyo and things start changing the way we're talking about with the clean finishes, makes me wonder about Bruiser Brody. You always hear the hypotheticals. Would Brody have gone and worked with Hogan, or would Brody have eventually fit into ECW if he had still been working? But I'm curious what you think, Dave, how Brody would have reacted to the era of clean finishes coming into the big promotions.
I think he would have understood it because, I mean, he'd been careful, but I think that, you know, because if you remember right before he died, you know, Baba pretty much laid down the law with him and Jumbo. You're going to do a 1-on-1, and Brody did it without any complaints. So I think he would have adapted just like Stan Hansen did. You know, the whole thing with what would have happened with Brody is really determined on physically how much he could have held up. And I don't know the answer. He was 3 years older than Stan. He did have some injuries. That was a real tough All Japan style, but I think he would have thrived with it. And he had the aura. You know what I mean? In the sense, because look at Stan. Stan went till, what was it? Stan went till like 2000. You know, and Stan was a key part of that golden era. And I think Brody would have been a key part of some of it. Perhaps he would have, you know, gone with Onita and done like I think Onita and Brody would have been the biggest baseball stadium show of them all, or equal to the Tenru one. And I do think that he would have for sure been in ECW and out of ECW and probably in WCW, you know, and out of WCW in that era. But I think that he would have always had an affiliation with Japan until, you know, physically he just would have to not, you know, I think that he would be like Stan. I think that one day it would just be, I can't do it anymore and I'm done. I don't think that I don't see him staying and being like the Sheik or somebody like that, you know, as a shell of themselves that are working in their 60s. But as long as he was in shape, and, you know, his body could hold up to it, I think he would have been a major player for sure.
Hey, Dave, let me ask you, do you think had he not had his own health issues, would Gordy eventually have become the #1 American? Or do you think he had a glass ceiling that he would have never gotten past?
I think he would have been the number one American, but I don't think he would have been as big as star as Hansen or Brody. I think that as good as he was, I don't think he had the charisma those two guys had. But I think that he'd have been bigger than Steve Williams was, though. You know, if you remember Steve Williams and when Steve Williams was at his real peak in the mid 90s and was awesome, I think Gordy would have been, because Gordy was better. I think Gordy would have been in that role. And I think like Gordy and Doc probably would have stayed a team. And I think that they would have been, just because of tenure and everything, and because they'd be working with Kawada and Taue and Misawa and Kobashi and then Misawa and Akiyama and all them, because they would have so many great matches. If Gordy hadn't have had the issues, I think that they would have been like, people would now say that they were like the greatest tag team maybe of all time. I think that they would have with more years, because they would have been, because I think they would have kept them together. I don't think they would have broken them up. And I think that they would have, you know, because the wrestling got so good. And if you look at how Doc improved with that, I think Gordy would have as well. You know, because Gordy was the natural of all naturals. You know, I mean, he's another one where it's really kind of sad to me that people don't know about Terry Gordy, because, you know, he was just I mean, as a worker, I think he was better. I think as a pure worker, he was better than Brody or Hansen, because he could do more and he had the great timing and everything, but he didn't have he had charisma, but he didn't have their level of charisma.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yes, that's a fair assessment.
No, because I can't see Gordy getting to that next level. I could see them, you know, making him maybe the top American, but I can't see him being considered at that level of Stan Hansen or Brody.
No, I don't. I think, but I think he would have been like bigger than like say Scott Norton or Steve Williams.
Yes.
You know,
oh yeah, easily.
When you look at who the next generation of top foreigners were, you know, he would have been. Because remember. Let's see, how old was Terry when he had the problem? 32? So he'd have probably had 8 to 10 really good years there, a lot more. And then he would have had probably some time as like the kind of like the legend and you know, like he'd start putting people over more and everything like that at, you know, like, I don't know. You know what? Who probably would have surpassed him though, now that I think about it, was Vader. Because Vader did have more charisma than he did. And Vader could do it all also.
Yeah, you know, and the thing about Gordy, too, I thought about recently, I think it was John McAdam, actually, who brought this up. But the whole idea, if you look at, like, the Von Erichs, if everything hadn't happened, and when the Monday Night Wars was going on, you know, they would have all been in that age range of a Kevin Nash and a Scott Hall, even though they got started much later than him, because they were so young. And it's the same thing.
They were all younger than Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash wasn't Kevin Nash born in 58? 59, I think. So Kerry was born in 60, Gordy was born in 61.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And imagine, like, if, you know, the Von Erichs, you know, didn't have their problems. I mean, Kerry had more charisma than anybody. And Terry Gordy was like, yeah, they would have been, because if Kerry hadn't had his problems, I mean, my God, those guys would have been so big for years to come. But that's a tragic situation, that whole Dallas thing. You know, it's like, you know, the drugs, you know, that's really what it was. It was just the drugs, just destroyed that place.
Hey, Dave, I couldn't let this end without, you know, we were talking earlier about American promoters being stubborn in regards to using smaller guys. Please tell about the time you met Rey Mysterio Jr. for the first time.
So we were in Tijuana, and Kurt had told me about Colibri, this guy who was just was telling me how he's like 15 years old, probably at the time, 14 or something. So I see him in the stands. He wasn't wrestling on the card. And he's, you know, 5'4" and 115 pounds, 5'2" and 115 pounds. And it's just like, what a freaking joke. This guy's a pro wrestler. You know, it's like I just took a look at him. And it's like, oh, my God. Of course, the first time I saw him wrestle, it was like, okay, you know, this guy's great. No doubt about it. At least I knew it when I saw him wrestle. But, I mean, remember when he first went to WCW and he went in the dressing room and everybody, they thought it was like a practical joke. Until,
totally.
You know,
I mean, I knew he'd get over in Mexico, but I was really jazzed when he was getting over like in ECW, but I never dreamed that he'd actually hold one of the WWE titles.
I'd never thought he would get over in WWE, because I thought that they would never let him. And the only reason he really did, number one, is he had So I think don't even know people know the story. So when WCW folds, okay, they had no interest in Rey Mysterio. They thought he was a joke. I remember once they'd watched like a Nitro, and Rey Mysterio is being interviewed by Gene, and Gene's towering over Rey Mysterio, and they're just like laughing, you know, like, oh, they're pushing this guy, and look at this. So when WCW folds, they had no interest, but a lot of the guys like the Hardys, went to like Jim Ross and everything's like, Ray's, he's a free agent and we should bring him in. And then Ross had talked to him and, kind of said like, when your contract's up, sit at home, which is a nice way of saying, we're not all that interested. Sit at home for a year. But people were going, all right, we'll bring him in. He does have a name value. So they brought him in and they didn't do that much with him, but they treated him all right. And then what happened was they started seeing the quarter hours with Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero. And that's what sold them. And then the Hispanic rating for SmackDown was through the roof, and it was because of Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero. So it's like they did see that those guys meant ratings, and then they pushed them. It wasn't like we're going to push them to the Hispanic community. I don't think that they saw either of them as that big of a deal. I mean, Eddie was cool to get because he was a great worker, and Rey was, Rey was famous and this and that, but I think that was more of, the way that the mentality was. But yeah, I mean, I remember like all, it's funny. People don't really understand, like it's everything is timing. Because if Rey was like, came 10 years earlier, he wouldn't have even had a prayer in Mexico. Because, in Mexico, they wanted to make him a meme at first. And
at best he'd be a regional star.
He's smaller than Jarrito Estrada, I think.
Yeah, but he'd been like Jarrito Estrada or Octagon Cito and those guys, because he'd done great there, but it was a low ceiling for sure. But Conan like just insisted to Pena, we got to do this, and it worked. And Pena, to Pena's credit, he took this unknown guy who was like 17 years old, and he focused on him really big, and the guy got over. And I mean, I remember people going like, "Oh, you remember this stuff? Oh, the only reason Pena's pushing him is because Pena's gay and this and that." And it's like, this guy. It's like this guy. It's like that's why he's pushing this guy. And it's like, the hell. It's like this guy knows how to get over. I mean, you watch that guy live, and he knows how to get over, and that's the key. And Pena's no dummy, But people were so like, who could ever push a guy like this, right? At this size, it's ridiculous. And he was a real important figure in American wrestling, because if the fans had not taken to Rey, this whole generation of guys from like Bryan Danielson and stuff never would have gotten a break. Never. But once Rey opened up the idea that people will buy Rey against Randy Orton, which was tough, but once people accepted that, then Bryan Danielson or Ricochet or these guys, they can be main event stars anywhere.
Dave, you said at the top that Terry Funk had a philosophy, and we've heard it before, and usually it was pretty accurate, that Japan is 5 to 10 years ahead of what happens in America. I'm curious how much of that still is a sound philosophy, and also, if so, what, if anything, do we learn from what's happening in Japan now?
I don't know. I think the whole world is on the same plane because of the internet. You know what I mean? Because the wrestlers, like before, everyone had their own style of wrestling, right? And like in Europe, you wrestled a certain way, and in Mexico, you wrestled a certain way. Now everything's amalgamating. Like, you remember like the Mexican wrestlers that were great workers when they would come to the United States. I mean, one of the things that I thought was cool when I was a kid, because they worked a different style, like watching Gordman and Goliath, just an example. Were very, very different from the tag teams that I was used to seeing, but they were great. But the guys, or Mascaras or whatever, the guys in California, they learned to work with them because that was their money. You know what I mean? It's like you learn to make it work. Whereas when those guys, I guess the best example was the original Sin Cara when he went to WWF, and it was like, we have to teach him to work our style.
Yeah.
And I was just like, it's not going to work. That's where it's not going to work. That's the whole mentality of why it's not going to work. You bring him in as a star, and you have him do what he does best, not what you want him to mix in, to be like your style, because your style, he's not going to be that good because he's never worked it. And but now that's not that many years ago. But now, because of whatever, because of the tapes and everything, I watched the guys in at Arena Mexico, like Dragon Lee and those guys. And, they're working they're doing lucha style, but there's a lot of Japanese influence, and they could come to the United States, and they're not going to have problems that much with a lot of the independent workers. They may have problems in WWE because of, working's too fast and all that, but they could come here and work on a PWG show or something like that and shine like crazy. And the point is that the Japanese learn from Americans, the Americans learn from the Japanese, the Mexicans learn, everyone's learning British. There's a lot of British style that's being used to a degree in the United States. So I don't think stylistically anyone's really ahead of anyone. Although I think New Japan's probably like the closest thing to a ahead of the time style. But promotion wise, not so much. But if you watch other stuff, you can get ideas still. But I wouldn't say like now. Before, like with the merchandise, right? It's like I learned about the merchandise, before Vince McMahon did. And Vince McMahon learned when he went to Japan, even though he'll say he learned from rock concerts. Vince went to those shows, those New Japan shows with his father, and saw, all the Inoki merchandise and everything like that, and the entrance music and all that stuff. They did that there years before here. So yeah, that there was definitely that. But now, now there's I think people are accepting the women's wrestling as athletes as opposed to just like, the beauty girls and all that. So I don't know that that's necessarily the case today, but I think it's still cool to watch Japanese wrestling because it just gives you a different perspective and different ideas.
Boom!
Oh, good Lord.
There it is, the Superpodcast Roundtable. Thank you, Dave Meltzer, Kurt Brown, and Jeff Bowdren for being a part of that. Jim, as we begin to wrap things up here on the Superpodcast Second Anniversary Spectacular, once again, tell the listeners how they could stay in touch with you and how they could support JimCornette.com and Cornette's Collectibles.
Well, good heavens, they've got to know by now. You can listen to me and Brian every week on the Jim Cornette Experience and on Corny's Drive-Thru. That's for your oral pleasure, as in your listening pleasure, or for your video pleasure. You can go to Corny YouTube. We'll just go to JimCornette.com and click on the YouTube button, and you will hear more of me and Brian and more of me in general. And go to JimCornette.com or follow me on Twitter at @TheJimCornette, because after all, there's only one. And just mind your P's and Q's or I'll block your ass.
There you go, JimCornette.com and Cornette's Collectibles. Before we wrap things up, I want to say a few things. This is the second anniversary show. I am so overwhelmed and happy with how successful this show has been and just how many people enjoy this show each and every time it drops. Thank you all so much for supporting it. Thank you to everyone who buys Super Podcast merchandise or supports us by using the Amazon links or makes a donation to the show or tells a friend about the show. We survived 2 years because of you and your support. So thank you very much. A few people I want to thank here before we go. I want to thank David Bixenspan, as always. He co-created the show with me way back, and we wouldn't be here today without the contributions of Bix. Jim Cornette, our very first guest, and someone who has given this show a major boost time after time. Thank you, Jim.
What? It's my fault?
It's your fault. I also want to thank Scott Cornish. Scott does so much behind the scenes. He is the head comedy writer of the show. He does a great job. Travis Heckel and all the artwork he's been doing. He has been a great friend and someone who has gone above and beyond, not just for the Super Podcast, but for the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. Kurt Brown, one of the most popular co-hosts, has always been there for the show. Thank you, Kurt. Some of the people I've been fortunate enough to get involved with on a business level this year: Austin Idol, Jeff Bowdren, Ron Fuller, Scott Bowden, and we have more people we're developing shows with. Of course, Mike Mills. We have the Mid-South Wrestling Show coming, but thank you to everyone for working with me and believing in this crazy little vision I have here. I want to thank Rick Lonan. Rick has done the 3D visuals for both my videos for the Super Podcast and Jim's videos for tinyurl.com/corny YouTube. Every time you see a 3D opening, that was done by our friend Rick. So Rick, thank you. I want to thank Alex Last, my cousin. He helps out with a lot of stuff behind the scenes that no one knows about. Peter Berkowitz, Jeff Siegel, Dolph Ramsor, all big friends of the show, big supporters of the show. And of course, the paper bag assassin. You guys know her as my lovely other half, Suzanne. She has gone above and beyond. If you get a nicely folded shirt in the mail, it's not because of me. It's because of the paper bag assassin. And I'm also going to say here, I'm very happy to say that coming this spring, this March, Suzanne and I will be welcoming a baby girl into the world. So this is going to be a fun little time here. Jim didn't know about this. I'm springing it on him too.
Well, who do you suspect?
Who do you suspect? We'll see what happens when the baby pops out, and then I'll let you know who my suspects are.
Congratulations. Let me know who it looks like.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And like I've been saying lately, we have a lot of big things planned for 2018 for the Super Podcast and for the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. So as always, thank you to everyone who has been along for the ride and has been supporting this show. As we wrap things up, you can follow the show on Twitter.
And now wait, we should say one more thing, just real quick. Old Travis Bickle. Old Travis Bickle, you know he's just doing this to satisfy the community service requirements because he's from down here in Louisville. I know what's going on with him around town. And so, don't act like he's doing this out of the goodness, kindness of his heart. It's court mandated.
Oh, no, Travis Heckle is a major friend of the show. But on the topic of the show, you can stay in touch with the show on Twitter at 605pod. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. Hey, you can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. And you can follow the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network on Twitter at Super Podcasts. You can follow the Super Podcast on Facebook, facebook.com/superpodcast, the central hub of social media for the show. Travis Heckle's artwork, vote for the top 10, listener feedback, pictures, videos, and so much more. When you want an update about what's coming up on this show, go to facebook.com/superpodcast. Also, the best way to stay in touch with the show, if you want to send me a message, do so at facebook.com/superpodcast. Amazon to support this show by purchasing everything you would normally purchase at Amazon and not spending any more. You could use the link tinyurl.com/superpod Amazon. Other shows have links. Fuck those guys. You guys know how it works. To get a Super Podcast t-shirt, multiple designs, a polo shirt, the denim stocking for the holidays, limited edition, goes off sale as soon as Christmas happens, as well as magnets, stickers, and so much more. You can go to the official online store for the Super Podcast, tinyurl.com/superpod store. If you would like to make a monthly ongoing donation to the show, you could do so at patreon.com/superpodcast. And if you want to make a one-time donation to the show, you can go to paypal.me/superpodcast. This show comes at you each and every week free of ads. We don't jam it filled with advertisements you do not want to hear. If you appreciate that and like this show and want to keep it the way it is, consider supporting the Super Podcast. On iTunes, please leave us a review and a 5-star rating. It really helps the show out. Of course, you could download every episode of the Super Podcast, as well as access our RSS feed by going to 605pod.com. The top 10 is brought to you each and every week by Ramsor Records, ramsorrecords.kungfustore.com. Enter the promo code 605 at checkout and save 20% on all orders. If you would like to send something into the show, you can do so by sending it to the 605 Super Podcast, P.O. Box 1242, Morristown, New Jersey, 07962. That's the 605 Super Podcast, the Mothership! P.O. Box 1242, Morristown, New Jersey, 07962. You have something to say?
I'll pay you $25 if you just quit doing these fucking announcements.
PayPal.me/superpodcast. The Super Podcast is a member of the Arcadian Vanguard family of podcasts. Make sure you check out Breaking Kayfabe with Jeff Bowdren, Scott Bowden's Kentucky Fried Wrestling, Ron Fuller's Studcast, and so much more coming to the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. This show is a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. For Jim Cornette, I am the Great Brian Last. After 2 years, tally-ho!
No, that's not correct. This is Handsome, not Jimbo from Memphis. Charlie Brown had to leave town abruptly.
Okay.
Charlie Brown had to leave town abruptly, and I'm standing in for him. So it's much below my usual. Fuck.
Okay. I don't know why abruptly cracked me up, but it did.
Speaking of ballrooms, that's what I tell my seamstress that I wanted when I sold my.
Come on.
Speaking of ballrooms, that's what I tell my seamstress I want.
I'm sorry. All right, go ahead.
Speaking of ballrooms.
You.
Okay, all right. Maybe there's a link they can click or something instead.
I forgot the funny thing I was supposed to say right here.
and the paper bag assassin. Of course, you guys know. Hold on, there's a car going by. What the fuck?
Oh, you were on a roll.